Mom, don't contact us anymore. Our whole family needs space. The text from my son arrived on the night of my 67th birthday, right as I was setting a chocolate mousse cake, his childhood favorite, on the dining table. I had waited for him all day. Every time a car passed, I looked up. Every time my phone buzzed, I let myself hope. And then what I got was a cold sentence passed on a mother's love. The doorbell rang. My daughter-in-law stood there with a blade-thin smile and a folder in her hand. Guardianship papers. Sign them so I can take better care of you. I looked into her eyes, and in that instant I understood. What they wanted to keep wasn't me, it was the $50 million I control. Sign? No. I smiled, opened a drawer, and pressed the tiny recorder button under the wooden table. They didn't know that the very moment they thought they were cutting me out was when I began erasing them from my life. If you're still listening, tell me where you're watching from. Every comment you leave is another mark in this journey. And if this story has touched you, don't forget to hit like so it can reach even further. My name is Estelle Raymond, 67, widowed 8 years. I live alone in an old Upper East Side apartment, the home Grant, my late husband, and I shared for 3 decades. He died of a stroke while golfing in Arizona. In that moment, my world collapsed, but at least I still had my son Adrian, the one remaining hope. Grant was calm, practical, and good at investing. He didn't leave a gushy will. He built a family trust with asset protection terms. I'm the primary beneficiary with full authority over the income real estate shares, stocks, bonds, and an investment fund worth about $50 million. When he died, people said I was lucky. But losing your partner and being left with only money that isn't luck, it's a test. I once thought at least I still had my son and a family. To fill the emptiness, I started giving too much, too easily. In the first year after Grant died, Adrian got divorced. I paid his attorney fees and rented him an apartment in Westchester so he could stabilize. A year. Later, he remarried Tessa, a young, beautiful, sharp woman who used to work in PR, and I foolishly paid for the lavish Long Island wedding. I gifted them a honeymoon in Italy and covered the down payment on their new house in Westport, the place they called our dream home. I did it all not to show off, but because I thought that was love. I wanted my son never to struggle the way his parents once had. I didn't realize that when you give without asking for gratitude, people start treating kindness like an obligation. Every Thanksgiving, Christmas, or birthday, I prepped gifts, checks, transfers. All they had to say was, "Mom, we're a bit tight," and I opened my wallet. A walking ATM, like people joke online, maybe that was me. But this year was different. My kitchen tonight was still, lit only by candles flickering against Grant's framed photo. The chocolate mousse cake smelled rich, its surface still glossy. I had mixed the batter with arthritic hands, each stir a memory of when Adrian was small, a curly-haired boy grinning wide, begging for the biggest slice with the most frosting. I'd texted him in the morning, "Birthday cake is ready. Come by any time." No reply. By afternoon, I told myself he was busy. That night, when the clock struck 8 p.m., I turned on the porch light and set out plates for 3, me, Adrian, and Tessa. Each time a car went by, I stood up, heart racing, only to be disappointed. When the text, "Mom, don't contact us anymore, our whole family needs space," appeared, I thought I'd misread it. I sat frozen, watched the candle tremble and go out. Only me remained, and the truth. I had lost my son. Not for lack of love, but for loving too much. 3 days later, the cake still sat there. No one came. No birthday wish. Not a single flower. On the 4th day, I lifted the lid. The cream had turned sour. I wiped my eyes and scraped it into the trash, the spoon clanging against the sink like metal, striking my heart. I didn't know if I was crying for the cake, for my son, or for myself. But I knew this. Every illusion had to be thrown out like that cake. I sat at the table, pulled out my expense notebook, and turned to the old pages. $80,000 for the first divorce fees, $40,000 for the honeymoon, $200,000 for the Westport down payment, $12,000 a year for Maya and Owen's tuition, plus hundreds of thousands more for holidays, gifts, birthdays. I wrote the total, more than $1 million. Next to it, I added a small line, number of times you asked, "Mom, are you okay?" 0. That wasn't just financial math. It was an indictment. Adrian, the boy who once held my hand through Central Park, who promised, "I'll take care of you when I grow up," now called only when he needed money. Tessa, the daughter-in-law who hugged me after the wedding and said, "I'm so happy to have a mom like you," now met me with a cold gaze, a smile on her lips but not in her eyes. At family dinners, I sat at the head of the table while they talked renovations, school choices, vacations all paid with my money, yet no one asked my opinion. I'd become a decoration in their lives. My grandkids Maya, 13, and Owen, 11, were polite and well-mannered but distant, as if I were a guest. I suspect Tessa taught them that polite is enough. They'd say grandma and then go back to their phones. I don't blame them. Children reflect what adults teach. I used to think that as long as they were happy, it was fine if I took the loss. But that text was a wake-up call. "Mom, don't contact us anymore." I read it once, twice, 3 times. Each reading sent the pain in reverse from my heart to my throat, lodging there. In that moment, I understood. They didn't need me. They needed my money. And if they could sever things with a text, I had the right to sever back, not with words, but with action. I stood, went to the kitchen cabinet. In a small metal box under the drawer, I opened the lid. Inside was a mini recorder. Grant once gave me, "In case you ever need proof during negotiations." I placed it beneath the dining table. I knew sooner or later Adrian and Tessa would come back not because they missed me, but because of money matters. And when they did, I would let the truth speak for itself. That night I brewed orange blossom tea and sat by the window looking down at the street. Below, headlights stretched on, horns blared. People rushed while I sat in an apartment once full of laughter, now hearing only the tick of a clock. Strangely, for the first time in years, I felt clear-headed. Not a wounded mother, but a woman waking from a long sleep called sacrifice. I looked at Grant's photo and whispered, "You once told me that if someone treats my kindness as a given, I must teach them the value of loss." I smiled. Maybe today is that day. I turned off the lights, leaving only the soft glow of a half-melted birthday candle. Then I opened my notebook and wrote on a fresh page, "The Estelle plan starting today." If someone asked me, "What made you endure all those years?" I wouldn't answer right away. Because honestly, I didn't feel like I was enduring, at least not then. I thought I was giving, and in a widowed mother's heart, giving felt like the only way to feel needed. 10 years ago, after Grant passed, my world became too quiet. The Park Avenue apartment, white walls, polished wood floors once filled with the jazz he played every afternoon, now had only the hiss of the heater. At first, I couldn't stand the silence. I left the TV on all night, kept the hallway lights on, trying to fool myself someone was home. Then Adrian started stopping by more often. My only son tall, with his father's face, a warm voice. Each time he came, the apartment seemed to breathe again. He'd say, "Mom, I don't want you to be lonely. I just need to know you're okay." I believed it. While he talked, I'd pour tea, set out cookies, and feel myself calm. But gradually, those visits began with different openings. "Mom, I've got a little issue at the office." "Mom, my attorney says I need a retainer." "Mom, I'm house hunting, but Westport is expensive." Those moms made me feel useful. And in the emptiness of grief, being needed is a sedative. I wrote checks, made transfers, sent cash, paid bills not because I was forced, but because I believed love was continuing, just changing shape. I didn't realize the more I gave, the more I erased myself. The Park Avenue apartment where Grant and I lived more than 30 years sits along a boulevard washed in lights. Every corner holds a memory. There I cooked dinner, listened to Grant talk markets, risk and conviction. He always told me, money only matters when it's put in the right place, Estelle. Don't let it buy silence. I heard him then, but I didn't understand. Only when I compared it with the Westport house, where I paid nearly all the down payment, did I grasp what it means to buy silence. That house is beautiful, modern, with a wide yard and glass doors opening to a lawn smooth as silk. I remember the first day Adrian and Tessa took me to see it, both of them beaming like kids in a candy shop. "Mom, this is where our kids will grow up. This is our family's home." I smiled and signed a check for $200,000, never reading the small line below. The sponsor has no ownership rights. After that, every Sunday I drove nearly an hour from Manhattan to Westport for family dinner. I always brought Tessa's favorite dish, a bottle of wine from Grant's collection, and the hope that there'd be warmth there. But family dinner soon turned into a presentation. Adrian talked work. Tessa discussed redoing the kitchen, switching to Italian floors, repainting the living room. They called it upgrading the space. I knew better than anyone, upgrading with my money. They didn't ask what I wanted to eat. They just asked me to transfer funds before the contractors come this weekend. Each time, I smiled, nodded, and drove home in silence. I told myself, it's fine, as long as my son is happy. But the truth is, I no longer knew what happiness even meant. My attorney, Harold Benton, was the person Grant trusted most. He helped manage the trust, taxes, and investments. After Grant died, Harold checked in often with updates. "Mrs. Estelle," he once said, "I advise you to keep control. Don't let any expense become automatic." But I had Harold set up monthly transfers for Adrian, living costs, the kids' tuition, and even Tessa's credit cards. I said, "I just want them not to worry." Harold sighed but did it. Every month, numbers left my accounts automatically, and every month, the bond between me and my son left automatically too. In those 8 years, I helped Adrian save face more times than I can count. When he owed taxes, I wrote a check. When his car got towed for unpaid fees, I paid it. When he forgot Tessa's birthday, I booked the party. When they fought, I watched the kids so they could get a break. And through all those times, no one remembered my birthday. Year after year, late texts, or sometimes just an emoji. I told myself young people are busy, that I was asking too much. But there is a limit when you have to light your own birthday candle alone. Every excuse rings hollow. My friend Marjorie Hale, who lives 2 blocks away, once said over tea, "Estelle, giving without teaching is harm. You're not helping your son. You're making him believe you're a zero-interest bank." I laughed, sipped tea, and joked, "He's still my son, Marjorie. I can't just let him stumble." She looked at me, kind but firm, "But if you always catch him, he'll never learn to stand." Back then, I thought she was too strict. Now I know she was right word for word. The warning signs started last year. Adrian visited less, though I'm only an hour away. Whenever I called, he answered shortly, "I'm in a meeting." Tessa stayed polite, but her gaze had changed. One evening, when I offered to help fix their pool, she smiled and said, "You don't need to worry, Mom. You should focus on your health. Maybe you should let financial professionals manage your assets so you can relax." Her voice was sweet enough that, if you didn't listen closely, it sounded caring. But I heard something else, a shady intent under the sugar. That night, I opened my laptop and checked my bank accounts. Transfers steady, month after month. Money flowing out like water, and I had no idea how long I'd let the river run. I opened my notebook and began listing every gift from the last 8 years. Columns of numbers stretched on, nearly $2 million if I counted gifts, travel, and side investments. When I wrote the last line, my hand shook not from regret over money, but from seeing myself there, a woman who had erased herself with unconditional generosity. I sat very still. Only the clock ticked. I looked around the apartment, once full of laughter, now only Grant's smile in an oak frame. If he were alive, he wouldn't scold me, but he would ask, "Estelle, have you forgotten that kindness needs boundaries?" I touched the frame and answered in my heart, "Maybe I did forget, but I'll remember again, starting today." I closed the notebook, wiped my tears, then picked up my phone and opened contacts. Harold Benton's name lit up. I called, "Harold, I need to see you, as soon as possible." His voice was calm as ever. "What's going on, Mrs. Estelle?" I took a breath and spoke slowly, word by word. "I want to review everything. Every transfer, every authorization, every clause in the trust. I think it's time to turn the page." I hung up, stood, and made another cup of tea. For the first time in years, I didn't feel weak sitting alone. I felt clear, and I knew, if my wallet used to be a symbol of love, from today it would be a symbol of boundaries. The next morning I went to Harold's Midtown office. That building marble lobby, a hint of Arabica in the air, was where Grant and I sat with him for years discussing investments. But today wasn't about stocks or returns. Today I came to take back control. Harold looked at me over half-rimmed glasses, speaking gently. "Are you sure, Estelle? Pausing the automatic transfers will trigger a lot of reactions." I smiled and set my teacup down. Reactions are exactly what I need. No one knows the value of water until it's shut off. I signed the document stopping all automatic payments. The Westport mortgage, tuition, Tessa's credit cards, even Adrian's living stipend. As of today, that stream would stop. Harold nodded slowly. "I've never seen you this resolute. Maybe because I finally understand love isn't measured by a bank balance." I left the office and stepped onto the street. Early March air, cold and dry, filled my lungs, and I felt strangely light. I didn't say a word to Adrian. No text, no email, no call. They never asked if I was okay. I didn't need to warn them. I was about to change. At first, everything was quiet. On the third day, my voicemail filled up. "Mom, I think there's a bank glitch." The mortgage bounced. "Mom, Tessa says her card was declined at the store." "Can you check?" "Mom, maybe I messed up the transfer. Could you call Harold?" I listened to all of it and said nothing. Outside, the sky stayed gray, but in my kitchen, the morning light warmed a white porcelain cup. For the first time in years, I didn't feel dragged by guilt. By the sixth day, Adrian's voice lost its calm. "Mom," I called Harold. He said it was on your instruction. "Mom, what's happening? Please, at least tell me why." His voice held confusion, anger, and something I hadn't heard in a long time, fear. I turned on the answering machine and let it record everything. I wanted to hear the shift in tone from certainty to unease to desperation. On the seventh day, exactly 7:30 a.m. spanned pounding hit my door. I checked the clock, straightened my cream cardigan, and put on the pearl necklace Grant gave me on our 25th anniversary. I didn't rush. I walked slowly to the door. Adrian stood there, gaunt face, crooked tie, eyes mixed with anger and worry. Tessa beside him, hair in a tight bun, beige fur coat, gripping a designer bag like she was holding her dignity together. I opened the door, my voice light as if they were visiting on a regular morning. "Good morning, you two. Come in." Adrian strode inside. Tessa followed, lips pressed thin. "Mom, what is going on?" "What do you mean, dear?" I said, calmly pouring coffee. "All the payments have stopped. The mortgage, credit cards, Maya's tuition, everything. The bank says the stop order came from you. That's right, I said, setting the cup down evenly. I need to review a few things. Tessa let out a cold laugh. You can't just do that. That's our money. I turned and met her eyes. Sorry, sweetheart, but no. It's money I earned, I manage, and I pay taxes on. You've been beneficiaries, not heirs. The room went heavy. I pulled out a chair, sat at the table, and opened my brown leather notebook full of neat entries. Adrian, I said, do you know how much I've transferred to your household over 8 years? Mom, I didn't count. I did, I answered, flipping pages, my voice steady. A total of $1,842,000. That includes tuition, housing, insurance, travel, holidays, birthdays. And that's just the documented amounts. I looked up at the two of them, frozen. Now I want you to see another sheet. I slid a printed page from an envelope. Number of visits to see me in 8 years, 32. Number of calls asking, Mom, are you okay? 7. Number of calls asking for money, transfers, or complaining about expenses, 43. I set the paper down. The rustle sounded loud in the silent kitchen. See? I said quietly. This scale has been tilted far too long. Adrian dropped into a chair, fingers in his hair. Mom, I know. I've been careless. But you can't just cut us off like this. The house, the car, the kids' tuition, everything depends on that money. I looked at him, caught between pity and exhaustion. That's exactly why I had to stop. If everything depends on me, you're not the man of your family, Tessa cut in sharp. What about this month's mortgage, food, school, the car? How do you expect us to manage? I stood, walked unhurriedly to the coffee machine. The way millions of families do, Tessa. Live within your means. Adrian has a job. And you, I paused, turned, and smiled lightly. You can get one. Tessa glared. She started to speak, then swallowed it. That answer seemed to choke her. I set 2 hot coffees on the table and sat across from them. I'm not cutting you off, I'm pausing. And I have a proposal. Both looked up. I opened my notebook and pulled out a folded page. For the next 30 days, I want you to prove I'm still family, not a walking wallet. Not with apologies or gifts, but with simple actions. Call because you want to know how I'm doing, invite me to dinner for no reason at all, or send a real card with no transfer request attached. Tessa let out a bitter laugh. Are you turning love into a test, Mom? I answered without blinking. No. I just want to know if there's any love left to save. Adrian looked at his wife, then back at me. Mom, I promise. We'll do better. I know I've forgotten what matters. I nodded. I hope so, but remember, if I sense this is just acting, just a performance to get the money back, then everything ends for good. No more chances. Silence stretched on. Only the wall clock ticked off each beat. Then Tessa spoke, her voice low, no longer hard. In the meantime, who pays the bills, Estelle? I looked at her, my eyes softer but my tone firm. Someone who's spent for 8 years without earning a dollar can certainly learn to spend less for 30 days. And Adrian, I turned to my son, you have a job, a salary. It's time to live on your own steam. I stood, ending the conversation. 30 days. After that, I'll decide whether it's worth turning the money back on. They stood too, saying nothing. When the door closed behind them, I stayed seated, listening to their footsteps fade down the hall. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt a strange quiet settle over the apartment, quiet like after you shut off a water valve and still hear the last little drips in the pipes. That was the sound of dependency dying and of a mother beginning to learn how to love herself. I didn't have to wait long for the play to begin. Only 3 days after that shut-off morning, the phone rang. Adrian's name lit up on the screen, along with a photo of him grinning beside his wife and kids, the picture I kept as my wallpaper for years but deleted long ago. I let it ring to the third chime before picking up. His voice was gentle, almost too gentle, like he was reading a rehearsed line. "Mom, I just wanted to check on you. You've been quiet lately. Are you eating enough?" I had to pause a few seconds not to laugh. My Adrian, the one who hadn't asked, "Mom, how are you?" in 3 years, suddenly cared about my nutrition. I answered evenly, "I'm fine, thanks for asking." He paused, then continued, his tone almost too smooth. "I realize I've been awful. You've carried so much for us. I just want you to know I'm grateful." Someone who didn't know better might be moved. But I could hear paper rustling on his end, and Tessa's faint whisper behind him, prompting something. I spoke slowly, to let them believe I was softening. "I know, Adrian. Thank you. Take care of yourself." I hung up and checked the time. 37 minutes later, the phone rang again, this time a blocked number. A young voice came through, trembling slightly like recitation. "Hi, Grandma, it's Maya. I just wanted to tell you about my day at school." I leaned back and listened as my granddaughter talked nonstop about math class, a new teacher, a science project. Every detail was too perfect, too polished, like a carefully assigned script. I let her finish, then asked gently, "Maya, who told you to call Grandma?" A brief silence, then her voice dropped. "Dad said you were sad. Mom said to call so you'd know the family still loves you." I sighed softly. "I understand." "Maya, listen. I'll always be your grandma. Do you hear me? Whether the adults are upset or not, that never changes." "Yes. Do you want to keep talking or do you have homework to do?" I have homework." "Then go study, sweetheart. I love you." "I love you too." I hung up, my heart sinking. I wasn't angry at Maya, only tender toward her. A child being pulled into a grown-up performance with her own clear little voice. That afternoon, the doorbell rang. The delivery guy stood outside, arms full of white lilies and pale pink roses so big he had to angle them through the doorway. A card tied with silver ribbon read, "Thinking of Mom with all my love. Tessa." I set the bouquet on the table, its sweetness almost choking. I remembered that even on my birthday, this woman had never sent flowers, never even called. Now that the money was shut off, she suddenly remembered motherly love. I snapped a photo of the bouquet, sent it to Harold with a note. "First signal. They've started performing." 2 days later, Tessa called. Her voice was bright, tinged with a shy friendliness, like she was trying to bond. "Mom, I know it's a busy week, but I'd love to take you out for a girls' day. Spa, nails, a little shopping, what do you think?" I smiled lightly. The same person who once mocked my dress as outdated in front of her friends now wanted a girls' day? "Sounds lovely, Tessa, but I'm a bit tied up this week." "I'll check my calendar." "Okay, take your time. I just want us to be closer. I've been thinking a lot." Her voice trailed off, then the line clicked. I watched the afternoon light filter through the vase on the table, lily petals making soft halos. Beautiful, yes, but beauty with a price tag. And I knew with Tessa, everything had a price, even affection. On the 8th day, the post office delivered a pale blue envelope. The scrawled line read, "To Grandma Estelle from Owen." Inside was a handwritten note. The penmanship was even careful, spotless, oddly so, unlike the hurried scrawl I'd seen from him on Christmas cards. "Grandma, I think you're wonderful. I'm sorry I don't say it more. I hope to see you soon. You're the best grandma in the world. I love you. Owen." I read it again and again, studying the strokes. Every letter was overly sculpted, the lines too straight, as if someone had guided his hand until it was perfect. It made me smile and ache at the same time. That evening I called Adrian. He picked up fast, hope in his voice. "Mom, I knew you'd call. I'm guessing the flowers moved you, right?" "The flowers are lovely, and Owen's letter is sweet," I said slowly. "But both smell of staging." "Mom, what are you saying?" "Adrian, listen to me clearly. If you truly want to repair this, start with honesty. Don't use the kids as tools to ask for money. Don't hand them scripts to read. I've lived long enough to hear the difference between truth and performance, silence on the other end. I could picture him glancing at Tessa, signaling her to be quiet, afraid I might hear something. "There's just one thing I want you to remember," I added, softer. "If these 30 days are real, I'll know. If they're just a show, I'll know that too. And then this door will close for good." I hung up before he could answer. Late at night, I brewed orange blossom tea and sat in the dining room, the warm lamp casting gold over the wood table. I reached under the table to the tiny recorder I'd stuck there last week. A small green light blinked, still powered, still working. I slipped on headphones and replayed the morning they came over. Tessa's sharp voice, "That's our money." Adrian's sigh, "Mom, at least tell me. What's going on?" Then, me steady, calm. Hearing myself, I felt no regret. I opened a new audio file, the calls from today. Every tone, every breath, every awkward pause from my son, my daughter-in-law, my grandkids captured. Part of me felt sad. I once dreamed our family would keep warm memories, not cold audio files. But another part knew, this is the truth. And truth, even when cold, deserves to be kept more than sweet lies do. Have you ever had to smile through a play you never signed up to watch? If you have, leave a line, just one line. I want to know how closely you recognize that feeling. I set the headphones down, turned off the lights, leaving only the small glow over the stove. Outside, New York slipped into spring rain, cars slicing through puddles. I closed my eyes and listened to the rain mingle with the even hum of the recorder. I thought of Grant, and what he once said, "Never confuse love with bribery. Once people know you fear loneliness, they'll turn it into a weapon." I smiled. Grant was right. But maybe this time, the weapon is in my hands. The next day, I woke early. Thin sunlight slid through the curtains. I set the kettle on, opened my laptop, and backed up every recording to a separate drive. Folder name, opening act. I knew this was just the first scene. And the writer this time wasn't Adrian or Tessa, it was me. Marjorie's text arrived at midday as I finished brewing tea and rearranging the lilies that had begun to droop. My old friend never minced words. "Estelle, I was at the country club yesterday." Tessa sat with the tennis ladies. She spoke softly but just loud enough for the whole table. "My mother-in-law's been odd lately, impulsive spending, not stable since her husband died. We might have to bring in an expert to assess capacity." I froze, the flower stem slipping in my hand. A petal snapped against the crystal with a click. Marjorie lowered her voice. "I'm not telling you to hurt you, but you need to know they're laying the road for a different script." "Thank you," I said. Two small words felt like stones in a dry throat. I hung up and stood still for a long moment, listening to the clock beat against the wall. In my head, the pieces clicked into place. Flowers, the handwritten note, the check-in calls. Then the club whispers one side, painting the picture of devoted children trying to care, the other casting me as the erratic widow, difficult, with strange spending. If people heard only half the story, they'd side with the dutiful child. I dialed Harold Benton. He picked up almost instantly. "Harold, answer me honestly. Has anyone at all called your office asking about my financial capacity or mental competency?" A beat of silence. I heard him set his glasses down. "Estelle, I shouldn't disclose informal inquiries. But since you asked," Adrian called. "He said you'd made a few unusual financial decisions." asked about capacity evaluations and guardianship mechanisms and what the first steps would be. The floor seemed to tilt under me. Strangely, instead of breaking, everything inside me went still. "What did you tell him, Harold?" "I said you are fully lucid and that any move to limit your capacity would waste time and money and could backfire in court. I also told him if he truly cares, he should start by checking on his mother." "Thank you," I said, my voice steady again. "We have more work to do." I hung up and looked down at the busy avenue. The first sharp pain sealed like a cut under a clean bandage. It was clear now. The pricey bouquet, the painstaking note, the gentle calls were props. They were building a backdrop. We care so much. While up close, they shoved me into the role of unstable mother. I poured more tea. The steam fogged the glass. In that haze, I saw my reflection no longer trembling. If they wanted to play on the legal field, that's exactly where I'd meet them. That afternoon, I called Dr. Lila Khan's office, the neurocognitive specialist Harold once mentioned. The assistant asked a few screening questions. The earliest slot was next Wednesday, a half-day comprehensive assessment. Memory, attention, executive function, plus a clinical interview. "We'll send an official appointment letter and the documents to bring." "Thank you," I added, clearly on purpose. The results must be stamped and suitable for court filings. I hung up, marked the date in red, and wrote beneath it, "Calm is the first piece of proof." That evening, I called Maya. It rang a long time. I guessed she was deep in homework. Finally, a young voice. "Grandma? Finished studying, Maya?" Almost." I paused a second, then chose the gentlest way to say it. "I want you to know this. The grown-ups have grown-up problems. You don't need to call Grandma as a duty. Call if you want to or don't. I'll always be Grandma, and you'll always be my grandchild. No one gets to use that bond to scare you." Silence, then a little sigh of relief. "I understand, Grandma. Go study. If you want this weekend, I'll take you to the New York Public Library. The picture reading room is beautiful." "Yes." Her voice suddenly brightened. I texted Owen a short line. "Don't worry about Grandma. Study well, play ball safely. I can take care of myself." He sent back a basketball and a heart simple, more honest than any letter. That night I opened my brown leather journal and started a meticulous log. Time, place, what was said, who said what, in what tone, which bouquet arrived, what the card said. I even copied Marjorie's text verbatim. I taped the flower delivery receipt to the page with clear tape. Each page a puzzle piece, building a rebuttal file I could carry into any hearing. I printed an 8-year summary, total transfers, real check-ins, number of money requests, all numbered, dated, matched with statements. I added notes on the birthdays they forgot not to play the victim, but to contextualize behavior. I stacked everything into a red envelope, the color I use for documents no one gets to pretend they didn't see. The next morning I called Adrian. "Next Friday night I want dinner with the whole family. No occasion, just family dinner." He hesitated. "Mom, we'd love that. At the Westport house?" "Good. And I have a few things to say after dessert. Please invite 2 of my friends. They're older, kind. Seat them at the end of the table." "Which friends?" "The ones you met at your father's funeral. Jacob Stein, retired from Wexler, and Dr. Naomi Chu, a family therapist. They're coming for dinner, just dinner." I heard him swallow. "Okay, I'll arrange it." I hung up. The independent third parties weren't to threaten anyone. Their presence alone would be enough as silent witnesses for a night that needed clarity. While waiting for Dr. Khan's appointment, my phone kept buzzing. Apologies soft as velvet, tidy check-ins, offers to take you to the park, to lunch. I picked the gentlest invitations to keep the 30-day rhythm enough to lengthen the rope, enough to thicken the mask. Each night I checked the chip under the table, exported files, and labeled them by date and content. Tessa Flowers card. Adrian apology dinner. I didn't replay them to torture myself. I saved them to spare future arguments. As Americans say, if it isn't written down, it didn't happen. For me, if it isn't recorded, it will be retold differently. On the day, I arrived at Dr. Lila Khan's clinic. Bright waiting room, the faint smell of freshly sharpened pencils. She appeared with a neat silver cut and clear, kind eyes. The evaluation ran for hours. Digit spans, block designs, rule switching, reading comprehension interpretation. Midway, she offered tea. "Are you stressed, Estelle?" "I feel oddly calm," I said honestly. "Maybe because for the first time, I don't need to prove I'm a good mother. I just need to prove I'm lucid." She smiled and finished the last task. I left with a pickup date for results, the center's blue stamp shining. On the sidewalk, the sky felt like an open door. No rumor could declare me unstable anymore. In the afternoon, I stopped by the small church on Madison, sat in the back, and didn't ask for anything grand. I just told Grant in my heart, I'm doing the right thing. When I stepped out, sunlight shattered across the red brick, quiet, proud. That evening, I called Marjorie and described the dinner plan. She chuckled. "I'll wear the wine-colored coat. Need me to say anything?" "I just need you to sit, breathe, and watch. Sometimes that's enough." In the days that followed, I finalized a timeline. Who called when, whether I answered, the main point of each exchange. I printed 3 copies, one for me, one for Harold, one sealed in the safe. The night before dinner, I stood in my kitchen and looked around. The home was quiet but not sad. White porcelain cups, fresh flowers, the table runner Grant loved. I placed 2 things in my handbag. Dr. Khan's evaluation signed and stamped, and my 8-year summary. Not to flaunt, just so that if anyone chose to forget, the papers would remember for me. I rested my hand on the bag and felt my heartbeat steady. Strangely, I wasn't nervous. Tomorrow night wasn't a trial or a stage. It was just family dinner. But I knew that at that dinner, the truth would sit in the center of the table like a main course no one could ignore. I turned off the stove and drew the curtains. Outside, New York roared. Inside, I touched the pearls at my neck and heard Grant's voice like a breeze. "Don't let money buy silence, Estelle." I smiled. Not this time. Because tomorrow, I would 5. Speak with documents, with numbers, with the calmest voice I have. And when all the rumors fall away, only one thing will stand. I know who I am. 3 days after I received Dr. Lila Khan's evaluation, Harold called back, "I know someone you can trust. No flash, tight as a locked lake. Name's Quinn Park Private Investigator. He helped Grant in that Manhattan asset dispute back in 2011. I remembered that case. Grant once said, Quinn has the brain of an accountant and the instincts of a cop." I nodded, though Harold couldn't see me. "Give him my number." 2 days later, right at 9 a.m., the doorbell rang. A man in his mid-40s, tall, lean, charcoal coat spoke in a low, even voice. He showed his license, then said, "Mrs. Estelle, I know this needs to be quiet. No one besides you and Mr. Benton should know I exist." I nodded and poured black coffee. "What do you need from me, Mr. Park?" "Only 3 things. Old statements, transaction, emails with the bank, and temporary access to the trust account. I'll find the rest." I set a thick envelope on the table, everything ready. I want to know where the money I sent Adrian went. Every dollar. And if there are outsiders involved, I want names. Quinn's mouth twitched. A cool light flashed behind his glasses. "I'll dig. But prepare yourself when money's involved. People rarely stop at ungrateful." 7 days later, he came back. The Park Avenue kitchen was bright with early spring light, but when Quinn opened his laptop, the gray-blue screen glinted colder than any metal. "Here's their financial picture, Mrs. Estelle." First line, 7 credit cards, total balance, $148,000. Next, a second mortgage on the Westport house, $320,000. And a string of late payments from the kids' private school. I stayed quiet, staring at the numbers like a house whose walls were slowly cracking. "Worse," Quinn said. "They set up an intermediary account, call it a buffer account. It's registered to Tessa, but the primary recipient is Adrian." He zoomed in on a cash flow chart. Each month, the transfers I made to the family trust were split 80% to the main account, 20% to the buffer account. From there, the money cycled, paying down a slice of debt, then moving back, creating the illusion of a clean, transparent flow. "A soft way to launder movement," Quinn said. "Perfectly legal on paper and convincing enough to make outsiders think every expense is on the level." I leaned back, a chill running along my spine. How long have they been doing this? At least 2.5 years. I also found their private sessions with a separate financial advisor, named Meryl Stone, Family Asset Management. Meetings are scheduled on Tuesdays, often right after your monthly transfers. Quinn took a sip of coffee, then spoke slowly, like reciting a confession for someone else. "Then comes the worst part." He opened another folder labeled Social Witnesses. "They're building a social file on you. Neighbors saying, 'You forget things', club staff claiming you talk to yourself in the locker room, a yoga coach saying you lose focus during meditation. All logged with email confirmations between Tessa and an attorney named Robert Kane." My breathing grew heavy, not from shock, but from realizing every tiny quirk and petty rumor had been weaponized on purpose. "They need social proof to bolster a guardianship case," Quinn explained. "On paper, they're dutiful children caring for a mother who's slipping out of control." I asked, my voice rough. "Since when did they start thinking about this?" Quinn rotated the screen, extracted emails with a timeline. "Right after Mr. Grant's funeral, I have a memo from Kane to Adrian. The emotional period following loss is an appropriate time to initiate a soft guardianship plan." Those 4 words, soft guardianship plan, made me want to laugh. Polished language for legalized theft. Quinn went on. "I also found a parallel legal advice schedule with Meryl. They discussed getting familiar with the local judge and building goodwill with the Westport community. For 5 years, they've been stockpiling good witnesses by donating to the school fund, attending galas, and telling the story of a mother-in-law unbalanced by loneliness." I was silent for a long time. Outside, a siren wailed and thinned into the air. "And you're certain this data is accurate?" "I have copies of emails, appointments, transfer statements, even Kane's internal notes I recovered from an archive account. Everything is encrypted and backed up to a separate drive." I nodded slightly. "Good. Print 2 sets. One for you, one for me." Quinn looked at me a bit surprised. "You don't want me to keep monitoring?" "No need. I don't need more proof to understand people. I just need enough to lay on the table when they say, 'for Mom's sake.'" That afternoon, I sat in my study printing everything. The steady whir of the printer sounded like someone's heartbeat counting down. I organized it all. Cash flow charts, list of buffer accounts, emails about guardianship, Attorney Kane's transaction logs, notes from Meryl Stone. I clipped each set, labeled them in red, and slid them into a red envelope the color Grant always said was only for truths no one can deny. I sealed it and placed it in the safe beside Dr. Lila Khan's report. Dr. Khan did not disappoint. In the cover letter, she'd added a handwritten line, "No signs of cognitive decline. Mrs. Estelle is fully lucid. Reasoning, memory, and emotional regulation are strong. Any contrary claims lack medical basis." I read that line again, and Again, not to reassure myself, but because it sounded like music that finally loosened a knot. Those 10 lines weighed more than all the money Adrian and Tessa ever demanded. I leaned back, late sun striped through the blinds onto the pearls at my throat, flashing like Grant's reminder, "Don't let anyone retell your story the way they want." Quinn called again that evening. Voice even, "Mrs. Estelle, I'm sending the backup on an encrypted drive. Password is your and Mr. Grant's wedding date. I'll keep a second backup in secure storage. Only you or Mr. Benton can access it." "Thank you, Quinn. What do you plan to do next?" I looked out the window at New York, glittering like a sea of indifferent lights. "Nothing yet," I said slowly. "Only when they believe I've bitten the bait does the final move really land." He paused, then spoke softly. "Mrs. Estelle, you're not just lucid, you're formidable." I smiled. "Don't worry, I'm not chasing victory. I'm reclaiming fairness, the thing they forgot how to define." That night, I reopened the opening act folder and added a new one, Hidden Flows Financial Evidence. 2 folders, 2 stories. One about feelings, one about figures. Together they formed the full portrait of betrayal by people I used to call family. I closed the laptop and switched off the light. Street glow poured through the window, falling on the red envelope on my desk, its shadow on the wall like a seal over a secret now complete. I touched it lightly, a thin smile rising. Now I have enough ammunition. No shouting, no noisy revenge, just one evening and one line at the right moment, and everything will cave in. Day 29. A damp, pale New York morning. I was making tea when the phone rang. Adrian's name. I hesitated a few seconds, then answered. "Mom," his voice caught. "I'm sorry. I've thought a lot these past weeks. You're right, we were wrong." I said nothing. I could hear shaky breathing. Then Tessa's voice, strangely soft. "Mom, I know I've been disrespectful. I was afraid you'd be sad, so I acted foolishly. I want to start over, truly, Mom. If I hadn't had recordings and an investigation file, I might have cried. But now every word of that apology sounded like lines read smooth at a final rehearsal." I only said, "Thank you both. This Friday I want to meet the whole family. Dinner, Westport." A brief pause, then Adrian rushed in. "Of course, Mom. We'll make it happen." I set the phone down and sipped my tea. The orange blossom was still sweet, but it couldn't mask the cold steel spreading in my chest. The board was set. All that remained was the last move. That afternoon, I video called Maya and Owen. They were in the study room, shelves behind them stacked with picture books and little science models. I smiled, voice easy, like nothing big was coming. "I'm coming for dinner this weekend. But I want to tell you both something. No matter what happens, remember Grandma loves you unconditionally. The grown-up stuff, I'll handle. You just keep studying and being kind. Deal?" Owen nodded. Maya asked softly, "Will you be okay, Grandma?" "I used to be fragile," I said, "but not anymore. Just remember, kindness isn't the same as silence." I ended the call feeling lighter. Kids shouldn't watch a battlefield, but I want them to know the truth is never something to be ashamed of. That evening, I called Harold Benton. "Friday, 7 p.m. I need you on standby. If I signal, FaceTime in and confirm live legal witnessing." "Understood, Estelle. I'll have the Westport deed and the trust documents ready. Everything is in your name. Good. Test the connection beforehand." I hung up and looked at the red envelope on the table. Inside, along with Quinn Park's report, were copies of Dr. Lila Khan's evaluation and the timeline I built. Transfer dates. Dates they called. Dates the unstable mother rumor spread, and the first day they mentioned guardianship. All arranged like a score of betrayal, one I, and no one else, would play for them. The last 2 days I was busier than I'd been in years. Not planning payback, but putting my life back in order. I went to Harold's office and signed the new will. "Are you sure, Estelle?" he asked, voice low. "Very sure," I said, crisp. "The entire estate house, stocks, investment funds, savings, totaling roughly $50 million, will go to the Grant Estelle Foundation for scholarships and community health. My husband's name will live there with mine, not in the hearts of people who see him as a checkbook." Harold nodded, eyes a little wet. "He'd be proud of you." I smiled. "I'm not doing it to make him proud. I'm doing it so I can be at peace." Day 30, Friday morning. I rose early, took the red envelope out of the safe, and slipped it into my small handbag. Before leaving, I opened the kitchen drawer and checked the mini recorder hidden under the liner. The light blinked green. Full battery. I called my locksmith on Madison. "Can we schedule tomorrow morning? Replace all locks at the Westport house. Front, back, garage." "I'll be there for paperwork." "Yes, 8 a.m., ma'am." I hung up, feeling strangely light. No matter how dinner went, tomorrow I'd have the keys. At lunch, I stopped by a small spot on Lexington for the onion soup Grant loved. In the back booth, I flipped through the copies again. Westport title held by the Grant Estelle Family Trust. Trustee, Estelle K. Grant. Temporary eviction packet already signed, one confirmation away. Attorney Kane's email to Tessa using the line, "Once the mother-in-law is deemed incapacitated, the trust assets can be redistributed." I snapped a photo of that printout and sent it to Harold with a note. "This is the line they didn't manage to delete." Harold replied, short and calm, "Stay steady. You hold every legal advantage. They can't touch a single brick." I put my phone away and looked up. The sun had come out. Light bounced off the metal tabletop, and I remembered what Grant used to say. "Sometimes the win isn't in striking back. It's in being prepared so thoroughly you can't be knocked down." I smiled. He'd like how I'm playing this one. In the afternoon, I called my two older friends, Jacob Stein and Naomi Chu. Jacob's a retired attorney who knows guardianship law inside out. Naomi's a therapist who's seen too many cases of family abuse. "I need you both at dinner in Westport tonight," I said. "You don't have to speak, just sit at the end of the table. Observe. If you see me look over and nod, Jacob, you'll FaceTime Harold. Naomi, you'll note demeanor and conduct as an informal social assessment. I need witnesses." Jacob was thoughtful. "Estelle, are you sure? This won't stay a small family matter." "I'm sure. They turned my name into gossip. I'll turn the truth into a verdict." Naomi smiled over the phone, voice soft as air. "You don't need to shout, Estelle. Truth has its own volume." I spent the rest of the afternoon writing a short note, not a will, just a last page to myself. If anyone asks why I didn't forgive, I'll say this. Forgiveness isn't erasing the offense, it's ending the offender's control. I don't need my son punished. I need him to see the cost of greed. I folded the note, tucked it into my journal, and closed it. At sunset, I put on my navy coat and the pearls Grant gave me and looked in the mirror. No tears. Just a 67-year-old woman walking into the final match of her life with the calm that only experience and pain can forge. Before I left, I checked my bag. Recorder. New will. Evidence timeline. Quinn Parks Lug. Investigative file. Dr. Lila Khan's report. And my phone with FaceTime set to Harold Benton at the top. I inhaled, turned off the lights, and locked the door. Outside, New York was lighting up. Cars glittered, crowds hurried by. No one knew that in a suburb an hour away, a family dinner would become a mother's quiet presentation of justice. I stepped out and called a car. Streetlights washed over my face in the rearview mirror, reflecting my steady eyes. No anger, no tears, only purposeful quiet, the quiet of someone holding the final move. I reached Westport half an hour early. The two-story house they'd bought mostly with my money now looked like a spread in a design magazine. Crystal chandelier, starched white linens, a vase of Dutch tulips centered on the dining table. They'd prepared well not to welcome a mother, but to stage a perfect family reunion. Tessa met me at the door, a trace of expensive perfume. She tilted her head, a thin smile, syrupy voice. "You're early, Mom. I wanted to surprise you." I answered lightly. "At my age, I'm done with surprises. I prefer the truth." The housekeeper, the only truly neutral person there, hung my coat quickly. On the table, candles burned. The dishes were the fine china saved for special occasions. I sat, feeling the room glow like a set. Adrian came out of the kitchen with a tray of wine, trying to seem natural. "Red for you, Mom? I remember you like Bordeaux." I smiled faintly. "Right. Grant always bought it for our anniversaries." Tessa jumped in to keep the scene moving. "I remember you said this black dress makes you look more elegant than anything else." "I'm so glad you wore it tonight." I looked at her and smoothed the fabric. It was the dress I wore to Grant's funeral. "Yes, it sent your father off. I'm wearing it again to send off another part of my life." The table stilled. I sipped. The tannins grazed my tongue, bitter, clarifying. The main course passed under a pretend, cheerful hush. Weather talk, the neighborhood, any travel plans, Mom? Each question arranged like a choir. After dessert lemon cake with frosting, the kind Tessa knows I like, I set down my fork, dabbed my mouth, and stood. Candlelight slid over the black dress, glinting off the table. "Now," I said, each word clear, "it's my turn." Tessa smiled tight. "Oh, a speech? Wonderful, everyone." I raised a hand and cut in. "I won't be long, but I want you to hear me out." I placed a red envelope in the middle of the table. Tessa blinked. Adrian frowned. "This," I said, "is the cognitive and capacity evaluation from Dr. Lila Khan, a specialist recognized by federal courts. Conclusion: Mrs. Estelle is fully lucid, with complete capacity to manage finances and make legal decisions." No one spoke. I continued, "And this," I set down another stack, "is the buffer account statements, guardianship planning schedule, and the list of people you contacted to build social witnesses." I spoke slowly, evenly, without raising my voice. They all signed, and each believed they were helping a family care for a mother losing control. I've heard every call, read every email. "I know you started this right after Grant's funeral." Adrian sprang up. "Mom, I don't understand what you're talking about." I met his eyes. "You do. Because you discussed a soft guardianship plan with Attorney Kane. And Tessa, you emailed advisor Meryl Stone about preparing a lawful guardianship approach when Mom shows instability. I have the originals." Tessa went pale, voice shaking. Who made this up?" "This is a misunderstanding. We were only trying to protect you." I pulled out my phone and hit speaker. Harold Benton's voice came through, clear and cool. "This is Harold Benton, counsel to Mrs. Estelle Grant. Under Connecticut law, any deliberate fabrication of evidence to secure control over the assets of a competent adult constitutes legal fraud. Additionally, using an elderly person's assets without authorization is financial elder abuse, subject to criminal prosecution." Tessa went pale, lips pressed tight. Adrian stood frozen. I gently set the phone down. "Thank you, Harold. I'll call you back." Then I turned to them, my voice calm. "If you still think this is a misunderstanding, listen to this." I took a small recorder from my handbag and pressed play. Adrian's voice rang out clear, echoing through the quiet dining room. "Just sign it. Mom won't understand. If we wait, she might change her mind. Doing it on her birthday makes the most sense. She'll be soft." Then Tessa's voice, "Don't forget the trust if we don't get control of those assets soon. It'll be too late." A soft gasp came from the head of the table. "Maya." She set her spoon down, eyes wide, lips trembling. "Dad, Mom, why?" Owen's face went rigid as he stared at his parents like they were strangers. I stopped the recorder and looked down at the two of them. Kids, the grown-up stuff isn't yours to carry. I know none of this is your fault. Remember, real love never needs to be hidden. I squeezed Maya's hand, then turned back to Adrian and Tessa. My voice stayed even, no shaking, no anger. In front of my grandchildren, I won't lower myself by yelling. But I do have a duty to spell out the consequences. I took out another thin file and set it on the table. These are the legal papers for the Westport house. The entire property belongs to the Grant Estelle Family Trust. I'm the trustee. You are guests, nothing more. The eviction packet is signed. The lawful move-out deadline is 14 days. Adrian stepped back, face drained. You can't do this. This is my house. No, I said softly. This is the house of the woman you used to call. Mom, the one who paid for everything, from your wedding to your children's tuition. Starting today, that mother stops being a bank. Tessa broke down, sobbing, trying to grab my hand. Mom, I'm sorry. I was scared of losing everything. I didn't know it would go this far. I pulled my hand back and looked at her. Not angry anymore, just tired. Tessa, if you were truly afraid of losing, you should have learned how to keep. But you didn't keep trust, and that's the one thing money can't buy back. The room fell dead silent. Only the small crackle of candle wicks and the wall clock counting seconds remained. I glanced at Jacob and Naomi, my two friends at the end of the table. They said nothing, just gave the slightest nod. I knew everything had been recorded, in full. I gathered the documents and put them in my bag. Before standing, I looked around the table and softened my voice. I don't need you to be punished. I need you to understand that. Every action has a price. If you want to start over, live on your own 2 feet. If you choose the old path, then the law will teach you the rest. I paused, letting my eyes rest on Maya and Owen once more. You two, Grandma will still be here if one day you need a place to come home to. Just not today. Then I turned and walked away without looking back. Outside, the Westport night air tasted faintly of salt. I stepped out feeling like I had closed a long chapter. Behind me, I heard Tessa's sobs and Adrian calling out, "Mom, please!" But I didn't stop. Moonlight spilled across the stone path, throwing a long, steady shadow of me. I knew they would never forget the image of the woman in a black dress walking out of the house that had been their symbol, red envelope in hand, head held high. And I knew that from that moment, I'd taken back my name, Estelle Grant. The next morning, I woke earlier than usual. New York was cold and dry. Winter lights slanted through the crater. Blinds. I made tea, opened the window, and took a deep breath. For the first time in years, the silence didn't feel like a void. It felt like space to be free. I'd spent the night writing the final lines in the packet for Harold not to hurt Adrian and Tessa, but to close a phase I'd enabled for too long. That afternoon, I drove back to Westport alone. The gates stood open. No laughter, no perfume like the night before, just silence heavy and hollow. Adrian and Tessa sat on the sofa, faces drawn. I didn't circle around it. I'm here to make things clear. I set the file on the table, my voice steady, not shaking. Under the trust terms, you have 30 days to vacate the Westport house. This isn't punishment. It's putting everyone back in the right place. This home belongs to the Grant Estelle Family Trust, created to serve community funds and medical research, not something for anyone to cling to. Adrian lowered his head, hands clenched. Mom, we know we fought. We're wrong. But the kids, their school. I nodded slightly. I've accounted for that. I'll support Maya and Owen's tuition paid directly to the school, not through the parents. Their education won't be disrupted. But that's for them, not for you. Tessa looked up, eyes red. Are you throwing our whole family out? We have nowhere else. No, I said, still gentle but firm. I'm not throwing you out. I'm giving you 30 days to stand on your own feet. I pulled 2 envelopes from my bag. These are career counselors Harold arranged. One specializes in re-entry for women who've been out of the workforce, Tessa. Contact her. And this is a list of open project management roles around Stamford that fit Adrian's background. You can both start over if you're willing to relearn how to work. Tessa's voice shook. You don't understand, we were just trying to help you, so you wouldn't be tricked by others. I gave a fawn. Small, wry smile, no bitterness, only the sour truth. Help? By pushing guardianship papers? By hiring people to spin a story that I'm out of control? Listen, help is a right to give, not a tribute you're entitled to collect. I've let you forget that for too long. The room sank back into silence. Only the clock ticked, as if measuring out the beats of my patience. I opened another file and set it down. This is my new will. I'm saying it now to avoid any misunderstanding later. The entire estate house, stocks, savings, investment funds, totaling $50 million will go to education, healthcare, and scholarship funds under the Grant Foundation. Your father's legacy and mine will serve those who truly need help, not those planning to take it. Adrian lifted his head, eyes shining. Mom, you're not leaving anything to me? I looked at my son, the baby I held when he was only hours old, the boy I soothed in the dark, the man whose early debts I paid, and said quietly, I'm leaving you more than money. I'm leaving you the chance to start over. If you use it, that's the greatest inheritance I can give. Tears rolled down Adrian's face, but I knew it wasn't just loss, it was the first time in his life he'd be responsible for himself. I turned to the study table where Maya and Owen sat silent. They didn't speak, but I saw fear in their eyes, the kind kids feel when they realize adults aren't perfect. I went over and sat at their level. Kids, Grandma has a little gift just for you. I took out 2 small envelopes. Inside are a letter from me, city library cards, and a list of free community activities, places I'd like you to try this summer. You'll meet people who teach by doing, not by talking. Maya looked at me and whispered, Grandma, you won't be mad at my mom and dad, right? No, I'm not mad. But I won't hide the truth anymore. Adults have to relearn how to live. Right, and you just keep learning to be kind. I hugged them both lightly, felt their quick breaths against my shoulder. Then I stood and faced Adrian. Son, hear me one last time. You can lose my money, but don't lose being a father. The kids need a guide, not an excuse maker. They don't need wealth, they need example. Start there. Adrian bowed his head, hands over his face. Tessa sat in silence. I looked around the room one last time. Everything was in place, the beige sofa, the wedding photo, the slightly crooked oil painting, but the warmth of family was gone. I'll have someone inspect the house after you move out. Don't worry, I'm not taking back anything except the truth. Tessa burst into tears, her sobs cracking the air. Mom, do you think you could ever forgive me? I answered slowly, without dodging it. Forgiveness, Tessa, doesn't mean going back. Forgiveness is when I no longer let pain run my life. If you truly regret it, show it with actions. She nodded and covered her face. Adrian stared out the window at the bare winter maples. I walked to the door. The cold air bit my skin, but I could breathe. Before leaving, I turned back. Harold will reach out to guide you through the move-out process. And don't think about lawsuits or spreading rumors every piece of evidence is saved. With one call, I'll file criminal charges. No one answered. I knew they understood. I stepped down the porch. Thin sunlight hit the pavers. The breeze carried a far-off salt smell. I got in the car but didn't start it yet. I looked in the rearview mirror. The door closed behind me, quiet. Inside, they were probably crying, falling apart, but to me, it wasn't the sound of pain anymore. It was the sound of illusions cracking. Merging onto the highway, I saw the sign, New York 60 miles. I let out a small laugh. 60 miles, but the distance between a mother once exploited and a woman now free. I touched the pearls Grant gave me and whispered, Do you see, love? I finally did it. No hatred, no selling my soul, just letting go at the right time. Headlights ahead strung together like stars. Peace settled in my chest. No more begging calls, no more demanding texts, no more staged family dinners, just a little jazz and an open road. From now on, if anyone asks, "Mrs. Estelle, do you have regrets?" I'll smile and say, "No. I only regret not doing this sooner." I lowered the window and let the wind wash over my face, clean and bright. Behind me, Westport faded into dusk. Ahead, the city lit up, and I, Estelle Grant, was truly free for the first time in years. A week after the dessert night, Westport felt like someone had flipped a switch to quiet. But at the country club, the wood-floored corridor still buzzed. I didn't go. I only needed Marjorie. She called me Tuesday afternoon, gleeful like she'd just watched a final curtain drop. "Estelle, you didn't have to do a thing." Dr. Khan's evaluation accidentally landed in the club's shared inbox official copy, seal, and wet signature. Anyone who whispered unstable got shut down on the spot. They changed the topic faster than swapping tennis shoes. I laughed, not a victory laugh, a relieved one. When the truth comes with documents, it walks itself where it needs to go. I just said, "Thank you, Marjorie," and poured more tea. Late sunlight slipped through the blinds, painting pale gold rectangles on the wall. That evening, I signed a stack of letters Harold drafted to the social witnesses, the yoga coach, the event coordinator, a few gym acquaintances. Each letter was polite and direct, reminding them that repeating false claims about someone's mental capacity can be defamation. That adding a line at someone's urging to support a fraudulent guardianship could be aiding and abetting. No insults, no heat, just statute names, section numbers, and Harold Benton's firm signature. Thursday morning, Harold called. "Eviction complete." The locksmith changed the locks at 7:30 a.m. The inventory log is signed by witnesses. Adrian and Tessa's belongings are sealed and moved to storage for a month per regulations. You don't need to appear. I stood at the window, watching a thin cloud cut across the sky. Strange how, when the boundary is clear, your mind feels rinsed clean. That night, I opened the first transfer files for the Estelle and Grant Foundation, seed money, and a 10-year funding plan for 3 tracks: secondary and college scholarships, community clinics, and programs to prevent financial abuse of the elderly. I signed with a steady hand even I didn't expect. Grant used to say, "Money is like water. Either you let it stagnate or you channel it where people need the cool." I chose the latter. The next day, I stopped by Dr. Lila Khan's clinic just to say thank you, even though I knew she was busy. The waiting room still smelled faintly of freshly sharpened pencils. Dr. Khan shook my hand, eyes sharp yet kind. "I only did my job, Mrs. Estelle." "You did more," I said. "You handed me a mirror to see myself clearly." She smiled. "Boundaries are vitamins for a late-blooming mind. Once you set them, your brain stops burning energy on fear and uses it for clarity." I carried that line home like a mint under my tongue. Cool, clean, steady. The last piece was Maya and Owen. I wouldn't let them become couriers for adult emotion. I booked a schedule with family therapist Dr. Naomi Chu, fixed calls every Sunday at 5 p.m., routed through her office. There, every conversation would be neutrally noted, no interruptions, no one standing behind to coach lines. I texted Maya, "Sunday, 5 p.m., I'll be there." She sent a smiley, then a drawing, a paper boat floating on blue marker water, the word Grandma on the sail. Owen sent 3 basketballs and Baforty. "Okay." I laughed. Kids somehow say exactly what's needed without many words. Then came the cleaning not of the house, but of my circle. I made one small rule. If a distant relative text starts with, "This is small," or "Aunt Estelle, I'm short for a few days," I don't reply right away. I let 24 hours pass. If it still feels like a demand rather than sharing, I don't reply at all. I call it cutting out convenient toxins. The things that wear you down aren't the punches, they're the daily pats on the shoulder asking you to give a little, then a little more. Each night, I wrote a gratitude log. 3 things, nothing grand. A cup of tea brewed just right, a cool breeze through the small window, a stranger holding the elevator door. After 10 nights, I realized the wound wasn't seeping anymore. It had skinned over not because I forgot, but because I put it in the right box. On the weekend, I opened Grant's closet. The familiar masculine scent had faded, leaving touchable memories. Wool lapels, silver cufflinks, the wine-colored silk scarf he only wore at Christmas. I kept a few things: the watch with a scuffed bezel, a crinkled jazz ticket in a coat pocket. The rest I had appraised for auction, with every dollar earmarked for the foundation. People call it giving away. To me, it was letting those things continue their journey. Sunday evening, I stood in the kitchen. No pots clattering for a family dinner like before. The kitchen was quiet, and I smiled, quiet but not lonely. Loneliness is being abandoned in a crowd. Now I stood alone and felt close to myself. The club gossip died like a flame splashed with water. Once instability was replaced by a clean bill of mental health, everyone pivoted to weather, Court 3's turf, and the upcoming ball. People are like that. If the topic no longer lets them feel right by gossiping, they move on. Marjorie said, "Let them. We live." I nodded. We live. Harold sent a long procedural summary. Locks changed, belongings sealed by the book, third-party storage receipt signed, a no trespass notice to Adrian and Tessa, plus clauses for complaint mediation arbitration tight as a net. I read it through and filed it in the top drawer, the one I only opened to remind myself that today's piece was built on clear lines. At the first Sunday call, Maya showed up first, Naomi's office in the background. She talked about an essay on a quiet hero, hesitated, then asked, "Grandma, do quiet heroes always forgive?" I thought a few seconds. No, quiet heroes set limits. Forgiveness means not letting hate burn you up. Limits mean not letting anyone burn you again. Maya nodded and smiled. Owen popped in late, held up his basketball, and bragged about free throws. "Good," I said. "If you keep discipline on the court, you'll keep it off the court." Naomi smiled in the corner and jotted notes. She was helping me build a small bridge across the age gap so the kids could cross without stepping into adult mud. Another night, a text from an unknown number. "Miss Estelle, I'm a cousin on your mother's side. I heard that you—" I looked at it and put the phone down. 24-hour rule. The next morning, I deleted it, not out of harshness, but because I've learned any tiny gap becomes a path for others' needs to seep in and erode your own. I swapped out the yellowed curtains and the too-dim bulb in the kitchen corner. I bought a few blue hydrangeas and set them in the Savannah porcelain vase Grant once brought home. I put on old jazz Ella Fitzgerald singing Bewitched, Bothered, and Bewildered, her voice like silk through the room. The kitchen was still quiet, but now it was warm, because it was mine, not someone's stage. On the weekend, Marjorie and I walked the park. The wind flipped leaves. The sky looked like a white sheet hung in the sun. She teased, "Do you think people are afraid of you now?" I said. "I hope it's respect instead. Fear fades fast. Respect, if built from clear boundaries and conditional kindness, lasts like paving stones." On the way back, I stopped at a used bookstore and bought a new leather journal. I had 4 words embossed on the cover: boundaries and gratitude. Each day I'd write 2 columns, what I said no to and what I said thank you for. 2 simple rails for the train of my heart to run straight. Night fell. I dimmed the lights, leaving a warm pool on the table. I set Grant's photo in the center, his head tipped in a sun-crinkled smile. I poured a little red wine and lifted my glass to the air. "Grant, hear me?" The rumor's gone. The boundaries are bright. I'm no longer the good mom who wears herself down. I'm Estelle, the woman who knows what to keep and what to release. Outside, the city hummed, but in this kitchen, the quiet wasn't a pit, it was a lake, smooth, deep, reflecting my face as it is, not warped by the need to be loved at any cost. I set the glass down, pulled out the journal, and wrote, "Today I said no to a roundabout money text. Today I said thank you for a 30-minute call with Maya's real laughter, and thank you for a quiet kitchen, quiet but not lonely." I closed the book. A chapter ended without fireworks. Just a line drawn bold and straight, one no one gets to erase with tears. I turned off the lights. In the soft dark, I heard my heart tapping a normal beat like any heart no longer bewildered. And I knew, from here on, I'm living the rest of my life on ground that is mine. The following spring, I got a short text from Adrian. "Mom, may I see you?" Alone. No fancy restaurant, no glossy cafe like before, just a small shop in Brooklyn where I used to take him for sandwiches when he was little. I arrived on time. Adrian was already seated, no suit, no tie, no luxury car at the curb. Just a plain white shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbows, eyes direct and tired. "I'm not here to talk about money, Mom," he began, voice hoarse like someone just out of a storm. "I just want to talk." I nodded. "Then talk." He went quiet for a few seconds, then exhaled. "I've spent my whole life protecting that all-set image. I was scared of losing the house, scared of losing status, scared my friends would find out I wasn't the Grant heir anymore. But when everything collapsed, I saw I didn't really keep anything. I let Tessa lead, and I was weak. I don't know how to be a father anymore, Mom." I looked at my son, the man who once thought he was the strongest in the family, now speaking honestly, without a shell. No excuses, no blame, just bare responsibility. I said gently, "If you want to start over, I'll listen. But you know this help isn't unconditional anymore. I have 3 conditions." He nodded. "First," I said, "you need stable work for at least 6 months, no borrowing, no asking for help. Second, both of you must attend family counseling with an independent professional, and you don't get to quit halfway. And third, you owe a public apology, not just to me, but to everyone you let those rumors hurt." Adrian lowered his head, eyes wet. "I agree. Can you trust me this time?" "I don't need to trust," I said. "I just need you to do." 2 weeks later, an email from Tessa landed in my inbox. The subject line was simple: apology. The letter was long, more than 1,000 words. Apologies line by line, explanations about pressure, fear, pride. I read it all, neither angry nor moved. I replied in 4 lines. "Tessa, thank you for writing. I don't need words, I need actions. Get real work. Stop posting borrowed images of a life, and let the kids see their parents no longer hiding behind gloss. When that happens, I'll know you're changing." 3 days later, Harold sent confirmation that tuition had been paid for a client relations and event organization course at Norwalk Community College. The payer was me, but the recipient was the school. I wasn't handing Tessa cash. I was investing in a real chance. Adrian started at a mid-sized project management firm, making about 1/10 of his old income, but enough to live on. And Tessa, once only used to high heels, learned to stand 8 hours in a conference hall, handle clients, and reset rows of chairs. I didn't interfere. I watched quietly from a distance through brief texts to Maya. "Your dad's home late, learning to cook. Your mom's turning an early class in the morning." I understood. Making amends doesn't need a stage, just a small kitchen and a pot of soup simmering. In the summer, Adrian moved no more Westport Mansion, but a small rental apartment near the kids' school. I helped not with my hands, but with a nod of approval. 2 bedrooms, low ceilings, a balcony facing the train tracks but clean and bright. Tessa hung pale green curtains. Maya set a little vase of flowers. You know, I told Adrian, small homes often hold the big conversations. He smiled genuinely, for the first time. In September, I received a printed photo in a white envelope. No signature, no note, just Maya in a blue dress holding a violin on the school grounds, and Owen mid-free throw, mouth wide in a grin. On the back, someone had written in pencil, "Ordinary life can be far more beautiful." I keep the photo in a silver frame on my desk. Every morning when I make tea, I look at it, a reminder that ordinary doesn't mean less, it means right-sized. 6 months later, I called Harold. I want to set up a small scholarship in the kids' names, the Maya and Owen Grant Scholarship. Each year, it will award students with strong attendance and at least 20 hours of community service. Harold asked, "Any conditions for the children's parents?" I smiled. "No, they already have their own condition, to watch their kids grow up in a healthy environment. That's a reward bigger than any check." That night, I opened my gratitude journal. First entry: I'm grateful my son learned how to apologize without excuses. Second: grateful Tessa stopped putting makeup on her fear. Third: grateful I kept my word, no return to a living stipend, only support for education and therapy. I call it helping without binding. In November, I attended Maya's school concert. I sat in the back row. Nobody noticed me. When the piece ended, she bowed and her eyes met mine for a split second. That look, it wasn't a child trapped in an adult war. It was a spirit free to love both sides without choosing. After the concert, Adrian came over, not much talk. Just, "I've done the 6 months. Work steady, counseling regular, no debt. Mom, are you proud of me yet?" I touched his shoulder. "No need to be proud. I just feel at peace." He smiled slightly. "Me too." Tessa stood a few steps away, not intruding, but her eyes no longer had the old calculating sheen. They were gentle, tired, and real. Sometimes the best thing a person can do is be tired at the right time so they finally stop. Back home, I poured a glass of wine and opened the window. Outside, the first snow of the season was falling. I thought about the path from that cold chocolate mousse on my 67th birthday to tonight, when I know love can return if it's taught to stand up straight. I remembered Dr. Kahn's line from our last visit: "Some children aren't bad, they've just never been loved the right way, and sometimes loving them right means stopping the funding." I get it now. Boundaries, kept long enough, turn into a way of life, and from that way of life, respect sprouts. That night, I wrote in my journal, "Today I said no to pity. Today I said thank you for life patiently," reteaching my son. Today I learned that boundaries, when sown with love, still bloom into flowers. I closed the book and turned off the light, the glow catching the frame of Maya and Owen. I thought that maybe making amends isn't about begging forgiveness, it's about living decently long enough for someone to believe you really understand. And in that moment I smiled, knowing every final exam once passed becomes a new beginning. A year later, my kitchen smelled like orange blossom tea again. I tied on an old apron, opened the oven, and carefully slid in a tray of chocolate mousse cake. Same cake as that year, but this time, not for anyone else, for me. Warmth spilled out, mixing with the soft March wind tapping the window. Chocolate drifted through the room, sweet but not sharp, like my heart now, no longer boiling, just warm. The Estelle and Grant Foundation entered its first year of operation. The first round of scholarships went to 10 students in medicine and community education, and we opened the first clinic Grant Community Health Center in Brooklyn. I didn't cut a ribbon. I stood back in the crowd, looking at Grant's name etched in bright steel. Something in me felt both heavy and light, as if, at last, our life had paid back its finest debt to the world. I didn't expect Adrian to show up. He stood in the back, alone, no suit, no forced smile. When people thinned out, he came over, hands in his pockets, voice low but clear. "Mom, I'm sorry. No performance, no excuses." I was wrong. I looked at my son, the man who once treated apologizing like a stain, now bowing the right way. I didn't rush to hug him. I set a hand on his shoulder and said quietly, "Growing up is about paying a price, not getting revenge. You're on the right road." He nodded. In his eyes, I saw a light I'd once seen in Grant's, the light of someone who fell and stood back up. That afternoon, Tessa came too. No expensive bouquet, no heavy perfume. Just a business card. Tessa Grant, Event Coordinator, Norwalk Center. Her voice was lower, steady. "I've closed all the credit cards. I'm learning to live on a real paycheck." I looked at the woman who, to me, had been a symbol of vanity, now standing with tired honesty. I didn't say much. "Good." I nodded. "Only when you stop borrowing from someone else's future can you start building your own present." She dipped her head. I saw her lip tremble not to play a part. For the first time, I believed she was actually living, not acting. That evening, I invited the family for a small dinner. No champagne, no white tablecloth, no fussy European courses. Just pumpkin soup, crisp toast, and the chocolate mousse I'd made. Maya brought her violin and played a slow Clair de Lune, and Owen told how his team won the regional tournament. No one talked about money. No one brought up blame. We just sat together. For the first time in years, I felt I wasn't the host, and I wasn't the audience. I was simply present, whole, and calm. Late at night, after everyone left, I sat at the table and wrote one last letter to Grant. "My love, I've learned to say no, not out of anger, but to protect the part of me that hasn't broken. I understand now, when we know our limits, our love doesn't shrink, it reaches farther. Our love isn't only in the old apartment or the savings account anymore. It's being portioned into scholarships, clinics, and children. We don't know who carry the dreams you believed in." I stopped trying to be the good mom who erases herself and started being a good person, the real kind. Thank you for teaching me how to be strong without being bitter. I'm free now, a freedom with responsibility. I folded the letter and placed it in the wooden box with Grant's old watch. A closing ritual, light as a breath. On New Year's Eve, I wrote the year-end lines in my journal. Freedom doesn't come from having or not having money. Freedom comes when we can draw boundaries and still keep gratitude. Rich or poor, love or hurt, gratitude is the only currency that can hold a family together. I closed the book. Warm kitchen light washed the wall, reflecting the years gone by. I stood, turned off the stove, and opened the window. The city breathed with me, each gust like a heartbeat waking up. No demands, no fear, just the real warmth of the present. I poured a little more orange blossom tea and smiled to myself. A year ago, I thought I'd lost everything: my child, my family, my love. But it turns out only when the false things fall away do we make room for what's real. I touched Grant's photo, then looked out the window at New York, the sky turning bronze in a spring sunset. And in that light, I heard my own voice, steady and calm. "My name is Estelle Grant. I'm 68. I'm no longer afraid of being alone. Because I know people who I know how to love themselves are never truly alone." Thank you for staying with me to the end of my story. I'm curious, what city are you listening from? From a bright kitchen in New York, or from some quiet corner of the world? If this story touched something in you or brought to mind someone who loved but didn't know how to hold on, leave a comment below. Every share is a way to tell each other, "I understand, and you're not alone." And if you want to walk with me into the next chapters where we talk about aging, awakening, and the slow rebirths of the heart, tap like, subscribe, or simply stay here a little longer. I'm grateful you're here, because somewhere in this noisy city, we can still listen to one another with a story and a heart that's still warm. The security guard looked at me, then glanced back at the photo on his computer and shook his head. "I'm sorry, ma'am. You are not Mr. Harrison's wife." I smiled. thinking it was a terrible joke. 40 years of marriage, 2 children, an entire life standing behind my husband's career. And with a single sentence, I suddenly became a stranger. Before I could react, the elevator doors opened. A woman nearly 20 years younger than me stepped out, her high heels clicking confidently against the marble floor. "Good morning, Mrs. Harrison." Every employee lowered their head to greet her, and me, the real wife, stood there, frozen. But in that very moment, I made a silent decision. I would not leave. I would stay. And I would find out the truth, no matter the cost. If you're still listening, tell me where you're watching from. Every comment you leave is another mark in this journey. And if this story has touched you, don't forget to hit like so it can reach even further. My name is Margaret Lewis Harrison. I am 60 years old, a retired high school teacher in the state of Illinois. And until that morning, I firmly believed that I was the only woman who carried the Harrison name in my husband's life. 40 years. That number is not just time. It is an entire lifetime. Mornings when I woke up early to make coffee and prepare breakfast so Richard could drive to work on time. Evenings when I waited for him to come home late, reheated dinner, and told myself that men in leadership roles are just like that. The times I turned down career advancement to transfer schools for our children. The years I stood quietly behind him, believing that family was a shared achievement. Richard Harrison is my husband, the chief financial officer of a major real estate corporation in Chicago. He started as a young accountant and climbed step by step to a position everyone now respects. I still remember the day Richard received his first major promotion. I was standing in our small kitchen at the time, my hands trembling with happiness, thinking that all my sacrifices had finally meant something. In recent years, our marriage had lost its warmth. No more spontaneous hand-holding. No more long conversations on the couch on Friday nights. Richard came home later more often, seemed tired, sat silently in front of the television without really watching anything. I didn't suspect anything. I simply thought it was the natural result of age and responsibility. That was why, that morning, I decided to do something I hadn't done in a very long time: surprise my husband. I found a small invitation card in the pocket of Richard's suit jacket, printed with the company logo, a 35-year work anniversary at the firm, an internal meeting, no big celebration, no family invited. I smiled as I read it, thinking that maybe a small gesture was enough to remind him that behind all his success, there was still me. I chose a light blue floral dress that Richard once said made me look younger than my age. I tied my hair neatly and applied a soft shade of lipstick, something I rarely did after retirement. Before leaving the house, I looked at myself in the mirror and told myself that today was a good day, a normal, simple day of a wife visiting her husband. The building where Richard worked stood in downtown Chicago, its tall glass facade reflecting the pale gray sky of an autumn morning. I had been there a few times for year-end parties, but it had been a long time since I last returned. Everything looked more modern, colder than I remembered. As soon as I stepped into the lobby, I felt the security guard's gaze. He looked me up and down, not rudely, but with hesitation and scrutiny. I walked up to the reception desk and smiled as I had done for decades. "I'm here to see my husband, Richard Harrison," I said. "I'm Margaret Harrison." The receptionist looked up and typed a few lines on her computer. The smile on her face faltered, then turned into something hard to define. She glanced at the security guard. They exchanged a look so quick that I might have missed it if I hadn't been paying attention. "Do you have an appointment?" the receptionist asked. That question made me pause. I had come here many times before. I had never needed an appointment to see my husband. "I'm his wife," I replied, keeping my voice calm. "I just want to go up and say hello for a moment." The security guard stepped closer. He asked for my identification. I began to feel uneasy, but I still pulled out my wallet and handed him my driver's license. I saw his eyes scan my name, then narrow slightly. That was when he said the sentence that tore my life apart. "I'm sorry, ma'am. You are not Mr. Harrison's wife." In that moment, I truly thought I had misheard him. I smiled. An automatic smile, the reflex of someone who had learned to maintain dignity. I was about to say that he must be mistaken, that my husband and I had been married for over 40 years. But before I could open my mouth, the elevator behind me opened. That woman stepped out, younger than me, in her early 40s, brown hair neatly styled, a well-fitted office dress, the confident posture of someone completely at home in this space. She didn't look at me. She looked straight at the receptionist and the security guard. "Good morning, Mrs. Harrison." The way they said that name, Harrison, was so light, so natural, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. She nodded in response and walked on unhurriedly. No one asked for her identification. No one stopped her. In that moment, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I stood still. It felt as if all the sound around me had disappeared, leaving only the steady click of her high heels against the marble floor, each step striking directly into my chest. I understood one thing very clearly. This was not a secret affair, not a momentary mistake. That woman had a position. She had recognition, at least in this building. My mind began replaying fragments of memory, late meetings, sudden business trips, the way Richard avoided my eyes when I asked if he was tired. Saturday nights when he said he had paperwork to finish. I had thought it was just work. Now, each small detail lined up into a cold, undeniable truth. I could have turned away. I could have left that building in humiliation. But I didn't. Maybe it was my age. Maybe 40 years of sacrifice wouldn't allow me to run away like a defeated person. Or maybe there was a part of me, very deep and very stubborn, that needed to know the truth all the way through. I turned back to the reception desk. My voice was strangely calm. "Excuse me," I said. "I have a short interview with Human Resources. I arrived a little early." The receptionist looked at me, hesitating for a few seconds. Maybe I didn't look like a troublemaker. Maybe my age made them careless. She nodded and pointed toward the elevator on the right. "8th floor," she said. I stepped into the elevator. The doors closed, reflecting my face in the dull metal surface. A 60-year-old woman, hair streaked with gray, eyes no longer as gentle as before. I pressed the button, feeling my heart pound so hard it seemed anyone standing beside me could hear it. As the elevator began to rise, I understood that I had willingly stepped into my own nightmare. But I also knew that from this moment on, I would no longer be the woman who closed her eyes and trusted blindly. I would be the one who asked questions, who observed, who faced the truth, no matter how cruel it might be. The elevator doors closed behind me, lifting me upward while my mind drifted far back to the years I once believed were the most solid, the safest, and also the years in which I had never once seriously asked myself, was I being betrayed? 40 years ago, Richard and I met when we were both very young. I was a college student studying education, carrying simple dreams, to become a good teacher, to have a small family, a warm home, and a life rich in meaning. Richard was different. He was ambitious, driven, always looking ahead, but it was that very difference that drew us together. I believed love could fill any gap. We married when I was 23. The wedding was small, not lavish. A simple ceremony in a local church with family and close friends present. I still clearly remember the moment Richard held my hand and whispered that he would take care of me for the rest of his life. I believed him completely, without a single doubt. At that age, I thought that as long as two people tried together, nothing was impossible. The early years of marriage were not easy. Richard started his career at a very low position. The pay was modest, the pressure high. I taught full-time, managing the household and saving every dollar. There were evenings when we sat at a small dining table, eating simple meals, talking about the future as if it were guaranteed. All we needed was a little more patience. When our children were born, life became even busier. I once had the opportunity to take a senior academic position at my school, a step many colleagues dreamed of, but it would have meant staying later, attending weekend training programs, and traveling often. Richard was at a crucial stage of his career. After many sleepless nights, I turned down the opportunity. I told myself the family needed me more, that there would be time for myself later. One refusal, then another. Gradually, I became used to stepping back, not because I was forced, but because I believed it was the right choice. Richard needed a stable support system. The children needed a mother who was always present, and I was proud that I could be that person. Richard advanced year by year. Every time he was promoted, I was the first to hear the news. I was the one standing in the kitchen, opening a bottle of wine, cooking better than usual meals to celebrate. I remember the light in his eyes, the way he held me and said he couldn't have done it without me. Those words became my emotional anchor, convincing me that every sacrifice had value. Over time, a distance began to form between us. Very slowly, very quietly, so quietly that I didn't notice at first. Richard worked more. Meetings ran longer. Business trips became more frequent. At first, he still told me about his work, his colleagues, the pressures of his new role. I listened and encouraged him, as I always had. But those stories gradually became fewer. Richard came home later, ate dinner in silence, sometimes only nodded instead of answering. I asked if he was tired. He said he was fine. I asked if he needed rest. He said the work wasn't finished. I became used to not asking more. In recent years, Richard's changes became more obvious. He often came home very late. Some nights I was already asleep when he returned, and in the morning he left before I woke up. We lived under the same roof, but the time we truly spent together grew smaller and smaller. I saw his fatigue, his fading smile, the sense that he was always somewhere far away, even when sitting across from me. I once wondered whether we were slowly becoming strangers, but the thought never lasted long. I pushed it aside, convincing myself that this was normal for couples who had been together for decades. That passion couldn't last forever. That mature love was quieter and more enduring. I told myself Richard worked hard for the family, for the children, for the future. I believed his exhaustion was the price of success, and I accepted that price, as I had accepted so many things throughout this marriage. We no longer had big arguments, no more fights. Everything was smooth to the point where I once thought it was a good sign. No conflict, no drama, a stable, peaceful marriage. I called it safe. I never doubted Richard's loyalty. Not because I was naive, but because I believed some men, no matter how many temptations they face, still keep boundaries. Richard was always principled. He wasn't the type who enjoyed parties, who showed off, who flirted. At least that was how I saw him. I never checked his phone, never tracked his schedule. I respected my husband's privacy and believed that respect was the foundation of a lasting relationship. I believed that if he had something to say, he would tell me. That absolute trust became the perfect blindfold. It made me overlook the smallest signs. When Richard changed his computer password, I thought it was a company security requirement. When he took his phone into the bathroom, I thought it was a harmless habit. When he replied to late-night messages evasively, I thought it was work. I built a world for myself where everything had a reasonable explanation, where there was no place for betrayal. I believed that after 40 years, if something were wrong, I would feel it. I trusted my intuition, not knowing that intuition can be numbed by habit and long-standing trust. Standing in the rising elevator, I suddenly realized that the most painful thing was not seeing another woman called Mrs. Harrison. The most painful thing was realizing that for many years I had lived in a false sense of safety, that I had placed my entire trust in a marriage whose foundation I had never once examined. I don't blame myself for believing. Belief itself is not wrong. But I began to understand that it was precisely that unconditional trust that made today's shock so brutally cruel. If I had ever doubted, perhaps I would have been mentally prepared. If I had ever asked questions, perhaps I would not have stood frozen in that lobby. The elevator slowed. A soft chime sounded. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. 40 years of marriage that I once believed was solid was now being examined under an entirely different light, and I knew that once these doors opened, I could never return to being the woman who trusted without question. The elevator stopped with a very soft sound, as if it didn't want to startle me. The doors slid open, revealing a space completely different from the lobby below. It was quieter here, the white lighting softer, everything arranged with near-clinical neatness. This was the executive floor, where Richard had spent most of his adult life. I stepped out slowly, forcing my posture to look as natural as possible. No one noticed me right away, and that brought both relief and pain. Relief because I wasn't stopped. Pain because I realized that in this space, my existence seemed to carry no weight. I stood near the main hallway where I could see the private reception area of the executive floor. From there, I observed. I didn't know exactly what I was looking for. I only knew that I needed to see, to hear, to understand. And then I saw her, Lauren. She wasn't wearing a coat, wasn't carrying a handbag like a visitor. She walked out of a small conference room holding a thin folder, her manner so familiar that no one needed to ask how long she had been there. A middle-aged man stood up to greet her, calling her name, warmly. Another woman smiled and asked if she wanted coffee. No one looked surprised by her presence. No one watched her with suspicion. She was an obvious part of this place. I stood there silently, feeling as though I were watching a play in which the lead role had been given to someone else long ago, while I was just a late-arriving audience member, never told that the story had already taken a different turn. The way they spoke to Lauren wasn't how people spoke to an ordinary colleague. There was closeness, familiarity built over years of working together. There was respect, and there was warmth. One man joked that lunch at the Italian restaurant yesterday had been wonderful. Another woman asked whether Lauren would take the kids out this weekend. The kids. I felt a slight tightening in my chest, just enough to make me take a deep breath. I didn't know whose children they were talking about. I didn't want to guess. But the pieces in my mind began to shift, quietly and terrifyingly. Then I heard that name, clearly, unmistakably. Lauren Bennett Harrison. The woman standing near the reception desk said the name as she transferred a call. Her voice was natural, as if it were a familiar name she had spoken hundreds of times. Harrison. That last name used to be mine, the name I carried for 40 years, through every stage of my life, the name I signed on my children's birth certificates, on property documents, on greeting cards sent to friends. And now it was attached to another woman, younger than me, standing just a few yards away, completely unaware that I existed. My heart tightened, not with ordinary jealousy, but with a deep sense of loss, as if a part of my identity had been taken from me and handed to someone else without my consent. I began to understand something I had been trying to avoid. Richard didn't just betray me in silence. He didn't just have a hidden relationship behind my back. He had built a parallel life, public, stable, long enough for everyone here to treat it as a given, a life in which there was no place for me. I took a few more steps, moving closer to the reception area on this floor. Immediately, a young woman looked up, her expression polite but distant. "Can I help you?" she asked. "I'm here to see Richard Harrison," I said, my voice sounding unfamiliar even to myself. "I'm his wife." The young woman looked at me, then at the screen in front of her, and typed a few lines. I saw hesitation flicker briefly in her eyes. Then she smiled, a perfectly professional smile. "I'm sorry, ma'am," she said. "Mr. Harrison is in a meeting, and we don't have any appointment information for you. Not, he can't see you, not, please wait, but no record of me." I repeated it more slowly, as if clarity might change something. "I'm his wife." The young woman tilted her head slightly, a trace of confusion crossing her face, then turned to a man standing nearby, probably an assistant. They exchanged a look. I saw them speak quietly, but I didn't need to hear the words. I wasn't in the system. I didn't belong here. The man stepped forward, his tone polite but firm. "Ma'am, at this time we can't allow you into Mr. Harrison's private work area without prior confirmation." I nodded. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice, because in that moment I realized how fragile my position was. If I reacted emotionally, if I caused a scene, I would become an older woman making trouble, an inconvenience to be handled quickly. And I wasn't here to be escorted out. That feeling of rejection was unlike anything I had experienced before. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, cold, like a door closing that you never realized had been open. I felt as if I had been erased from a part of a life I once believed was mine. I looked around again. Everyone continued with their work. Lauren walked past talking to someone, smiling lightly. No one looked at me. No one realized that the woman standing against the wall was Richard Harrison's legal wife. In that moment, a powerful urge rose inside me to step forward, to call Richard's name loudly, to ask them who they thought I was. But I didn't do it. I had lived long enough to know that impulsive reactions rarely bring the truth. They only bring chaos. I chose silence. Silence not because I was weak, but because I needed to observe. I needed to remember every detail, every look, every word. I needed to understand how this picture had been drawn and for how long. In my mind, there was only one thought, so clear it didn't need to be spoken. I needed evidence, not for revenge, not to humiliate anyone, but to protect myself, so that when I faced Richard, and I knew that day was coming very soon, I wouldn't have only emotions, but facts. I stood there a few more minutes, long enough to be certain this wasn't a misunderstanding that could be explained with a simple apology. Then I turned and walked toward the hallway leading to the conference rooms. My heart beat slower than before, but heavier. Each step carried a new realization. The marriage I once believed was solid had been built on spaces I was never invited into. And I understood that from this moment on, I was no longer a woman living in blind trust. I was someone standing in a place that didn't belong to her, quietly gathering the pieces of a truth that had been hidden for many years. I stood still for a few more seconds, long enough for my heartbeat to slow. No one noticed me. In this place, the silence of an older woman didn't spark curiosity or concern. I realized that was both cruel and my only advantage right now. I continued down the hallway leading into the executive meeting area. When the receptionist on this floor looked up again, I lowered my head slightly and smiled, keeping my voice low and steady. I arrived early for a short discussion with human resources, I said, avoiding direct eye contact. They told me I could wait in this area. She hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Maybe I looked more like a retired teacher than a troublemaker. Maybe no one imagined that a woman my age would have any reason to cause problems on the executive floor. I walked past without being stopped. The hallway was long and quiet, covered in dark gray carpet, evenly lit with no windows. Conference rooms lined both sides, their frosted glass doors revealing long tables, black leather chairs, ceiling-mounted projectors. The faint smell of coffee hung in the air, so familiar it hurt. Richard used to tell me that the smell of coffee at the office helped him stay alert. I had made coffee for him every morning, for decades. I slowed my steps when I heard voices ahead, not Richard's, but voices I guessed had known him for a long time. I stopped at the corner of the hallway, leaning close to the wall, a habit formed during my years as a teacher. Listen before entering an unfamiliar space. "Is Mr. Harrison having lunch with Lauren today?" a man asked casually. "Of course," a female voice replied with a hint of teasing. "Every Thursday. Their usual restaurant." There. The word was soft, but it landed like a weight on my chest. I pressed my back against the wall, my hand unconsciously tightening around my purse strap. I couldn't see them, only hear their voices. Natural, unguarded. "I heard Lauren made the reservation earlier today," the man continued. "Sounds like they want to discuss something important." "Probably the new project," the woman replied. "Lauren always arranges everything so carefully for Mr. Harrison." I closed my eyes for a brief second. Lauren. That name was no longer distant. It echoed here with a familiarity I had never had, not whispered as a secret, not avoided, but part of the daily rhythm of this place. I stood there listening, each sentence like a slow, precise cut. They talked about lunch, about restaurants, about routines, small details that only long-term relationships have. No one lowered their voice. No one sounded cautious. Then the conference room door ahead opened. I didn't have time to step farther back. I stood still, half hidden by the wall. Richard walked out with two other men. He looked exactly as he always did. Dark suit, quick stride, the familiar face I had looked at for 40 years. In that moment, my heart tightened in a completely different way. Not panic, not trembling, but a terrifying stillness. "I have lunch with Lauren today," Richard said calmly, as if confirming a meeting. "We'll continue this later." From his own mouth. No hesitation, no cover-up, no doubt. My world didn't collapse loudly like in the movies. It didn't explode. It froze. Everything around me became sharply clear. The lights, the footsteps, the rustle of papers. And I became empty. A cold sensation spread from my chest to my stomach, then through my limbs. I stopped shaking. I didn't want to cry. I just stood there, as if part of me had stepped outside myself to observe everything from a distance. All doubt ended in that moment. No more maybe, no more what if, no more I'm overthinking. The truth stood right in front of me, so clear it didn't need any further proof. Richard didn't just betray me. He had lived another life, openly, in plain sight, among people I had never been introduced to. I watched him turn and walk toward his private office. None of the others noticed me. I was just a faint figure in a long hallway, someone who didn't belong here. And strangely enough, that helped me stay calm. I understood that if I kept standing there, hiding, I would always be an eavesdropper, always an outsider. I had seen enough to know I couldn't go home and pretend I hadn't heard anything, enough to understand that if I didn't confront this now, I might never get another chance. I took a deep breath, not to gather courage, but to keep my voice from shaking. I adjusted the strap of my purse on my shoulder, smoothed the skirt of my dress, a familiar reflex from years before stepping into a classroom. I was no longer a teacher standing before students, but I was still a woman who had lived long enough to know there are moments you cannot avoid. I stepped out from the shadows and walked straight toward Richard's office door. The door was slightly open. I saw his back as he placed a folder on the desk. His office was spacious, orderly, exactly his style. On the bookshelf were the economics books he used to read in the evenings. On the desk was a framed family photo, taken 10 years earlier before the children married. I had dusted that frame countless times. I knocked. Not loud, not soft, just enough for him to hear. "Come in," Richard said without turning around. I opened the door and stepped inside. The moment he turned and his eyes met mine, I knew I didn't need to say much anymore. Every explanation, every excuse, every denial became meaningless in that instant. His face changed quickly, from surprise to shock, then to panic, a reaction I had seen many times before when students were caught cheating on a test. "Margaret?" he blurted out, his voice rough. What are you doing here?" I didn't answer right away. I just stood there, looking at the man I had called my husband for 40 years, not to find familiarity, but to confirm that I was seeing him with my own eyes, without the filter of trust. The panic in his eyes was the clearest answer. In that moment, I understood I had crossed a line I could never step back over. I was no longer the woman standing in the hallway listening to fragmented conversations. I had walked straight into the center of the truth, and whatever happened next, I knew that from this point on, I would no longer be passive. I remained standing in front of Richard's desk, not taking another step forward, not out of fear, but because I needed that distance to avoid doing something I might regret. The room was so quiet I could hear the steady hum of the air conditioner, even the uneven breathing of the man in front of me. Richard stood up from his chair, then sat back down as if he didn't know what to do with his body. He ran a hand through his hair, a familiar gesture whenever he was unsettled. I had seen it countless times over 40 years whenever he faced a difficult decision. The difference now was that I was the one trapped without an escape. "Margaret," he said softly, his voice trembling. "I can explain." I nodded slightly, like a teacher allowing a student to begin an answer. I didn't sit down. I didn't lean on anything. I wanted to stay alert. "Go ahead," I said. My voice was so calm it surprised even me. "I'm listening." Richard swallowed hard. He glanced toward the door as if considering whether someone might overhear, then looked back at me. In that moment, I saw how much he had aged, not from years, but from the cracking of the solid shell I had once trusted. "I met Lauren 15 years ago," he began slowly. Each word dragged from his chest. During a long business trip in California. At the time, I wasn't looking for anything. It just happened. I didn't react. I didn't ask why. I just looked at him and let him continue. She worked with one of our partner teams, he said. Smart, calm. At first, it was just lunches, work discussions. I knew it was wrong, but I thought I could control it. I listened as if hearing a cold report. No extra details, no emotion, just a sequence of events arranged to sound reasonable. Then it went beyond control, he continued, his voice dropping. I tried to stop. I really did. My hand tightened around my purse strap. In my mind, I saw the evenings I sat alone in the kitchen, waiting for him to come home late, telling myself his work was always demanding. Lauren got pregnant, Richard said. The sentence fell between us without echo or sound, but I felt a heavy force press down on my chest. I didn't step back. I didn't cover my mouth. I just stood there, receiving it as a final truth that could not be undone. I panicked, he continued. I thought about telling you many times, but every time I looked at you, looked at the kids, I didn't know where to begin. I tilted my head slightly. So you chose not to tell me, I said. It wasn't a question. Richard nodded slowly. I thought, if I kept everything stable, if I didn't let it affect the family, then maybe that was the least harmful way. I gave a small laugh, not a happy one, but a very brief, quiet sound, like the reflex of someone who has just heard something too absurd to be real. You thought silence was a way to protect me? I asked. Or a way to protect yourself? Richard lowered his head, didn't answer right away. His silence said more than any explanation could. You live two lives, I said, each word clear. One with me, one with her, and you call that stability. I'm sorry, Richard said quickly. I never wanted to hurt you. I was afraid of losing you. I looked at him for a long time. Maybe for the first time in years, I wasn't looking at him as a wife, but as someone assessing the truth in front of her. You were afraid of losing me, I repeated. But you weren't afraid of losing honesty. You weren't afraid of losing trust. You weren't afraid of letting me live in a lie for 15 years. Richard reached out his hand, then stopped halfway, as if remembering that he no longer had the right to touch me. I arranged everything, he said. I thought I could manage it. Work, family, responsibilities. I never neglected you or the kids. I took a deep breath. Do you know that every time you said, I'll be home late tonight, it was a lie? I asked. Every time you said you had an unexpected business trip? Every time you walked into the house looking exhausted and silent? Richard didn't respond. I knew he understood. I suddenly realized that for 15 years, I had been living inside a script that was already written, one where I always played the trusting wife, and he played the hard-working family man. Every detail I had accepted without question now stood out clearly, sharply, impossible to deny. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't slam my hand on the desk. Maybe because my tears had already run dry the moment I heard Lauren's name spoken in the hallway. Or maybe because, in this moment, I no longer had the energy to be angry. I just felt deeply tired, as if I had walked a very long road to arrive at a place I could never return from. I didn't come here to argue, I said, and I didn't come here to listen to your justifications. Richard looked up, his eyes full of confusion. Then, why did you come? I looked around his office, the room where he had built his power, his reputation, and another part of his life. I thought of the family photo on his desk, the picture that now suddenly felt out of place. "I came to know the truth," I said, "and now I do." I turned and walked toward the door. Richard called my name, his voice breaking. "Margaret, please, we can talk more. I'll explain everything. We can figure something out." I stopped with my hand on the doorknob, but I didn't turn around. "No," I said, very softly but firmly. "There is no we here anymore." I opened the door and stepped into the hallway. No one paid attention to me. The men and women outside continued with their work, their everyday conversations. The world didn't stop just because my marriage had collapsed. I walked straight to the elevator and pressed the button. When the doors closed, I finally allowed myself to let out a long breath. I didn't cry. I just felt empty. As the elevator went down, I looked at my reflection in the dim mirror. A 60-year-old woman standing straight, her eyes no longer unfocused. I knew very clearly that what I had left behind wasn't just Richard's office, but a marriage that had been dead for a long time. Only today, I had officially laid it to rest, and I also knew that when I stepped out of that building, I would never return in my old role again. I walked out of the building when the sun was higher than when I arrived, but the light didn't make me feel any warmer. The wind swept across the plaza in front of the entrance, carrying early fallen yellow leaves that brushed lightly against my feet before drifting away. Everything continued as usual. Cars, pedestrians, distant horns. Only I felt as if I had been pulled out of a familiar orbit. I drove home in silence. No radio, no phone calls. I needed that quiet, like a fragile buffer between what I had just learned and what I was about to face. The road home was so familiar I could drive it without looking at the signs. I had taken this route for decades, driving the kids to school, going grocery shopping, coming home after teaching. Today, it felt longer than usual. The house came into view, the house I had once called home, the white painted front, the maple trees in the yard that had grown tall over the years, their branches nearly covering the living room windows. I turned off the engine and sat in the car for a moment, my hands still on the steering wheel. Not because I wasn't ready to go inside, but because I wanted to remember this feeling, the feeling of standing in front of something familiar, knowing I was about to see it with different eyes. Inside, everything was the same. There was no sign that life here had ever been shared with another woman. Richard's coat still hung on the hook by the door. The shoes he wore most often were neatly placed under the shelf. The familiar scent of wood and mild cleaner still lingered in the air. If not for this morning, I would have thought everything was intact. I set my purse down on the table, took off my coat, and stood in the middle of the living room, unsure where to begin. I wasn't looking for an emotional outburst. I was looking for the truth. And I knew that if Richard had managed to hide another life from me for 15 years, there had to be traces. I went upstairs and entered our bedroom. That room had once been the place where I felt safest. Now it was simply a space that needed to be examined. I opened Richard's closet. Everything was arranged as neatly as ever, suits hanging by color, shirts folded carefully, ties rolled in a drawer. Nothing looked unusual on the surface. I began searching through the drawers, calmly, without panic. I had taught long enough to know that the truth rarely sits in obvious places. I checked the pockets of old suit jackets, the lower drawers where Richard kept, things he rarely used. Then I saw it. A small, dark wooden box, tucked deep inside, hidden behind thick winter socks. The box wasn't large, but it felt heavier than I expected when I picked it up. It had a small lock. I didn't remember ever seeing it before. Richard had never mentioned it. I tried to open it, but it was locked. In that moment, I didn't hesitate. I opened the vanity drawer, took out the small scissors I used to cut loose threads, and gently pried at the lock. There was a dry click. The lid popped open. Inside were neatly arranged documents, as if someone had carefully organized their secret life. I took them out one by one and laid them on the bed. A lease agreement for an apartment on the other side of the city in Richard's name. The lease had started 15 years ago and had been renewed regularly. I recognized the area, not far from where his company once had a branch office. Next were bank statements, an account I had never known about, regular transfers, consistent, stretching over many years. Not impulsive spending from a temporary affair, but planned, responsible financial support. I didn't need to be an accountant to understand that. Then there were photographs. I picked up the first one, my heart sinking. Richard stood beside Lauren, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder. They were at a beach, sunlight bright around them. His smile, the smile I hadn't seen in years. The next photo showed Richard holding a small child, then the child growing older in each frame. Birthdays, parks, dinner tables, a complete family recorded over time. I sat down on the edge of the bed, the photos spread out in front of me. There was nothing left to deny, nothing left to explain away. This wasn't a mistake. This was another life built alongside mine. I didn't cry. Not because I wasn't in pain, but because every tear seemed frozen. I just sat there, looking at the undeniable evidence, letting the truth sink in. 15 years. While I lived with a husband I trusted completely, he had been a father to another child, a partner to another woman. I don't know how long I sat there. When I finally stood up, the light outside the window had shifted toward afternoon. I gathered the documents and placed them back into the wooden box, leaving it unlocked. There was no need anymore. I heard a car pull up outside. A car door closing. Richard was home. My heartbeat slowed. Steadier now. I realized I was ready for this moment, even though I hadn't planned it. Richard walked into the house and called my name as usual. His voice echoed from downstairs, carrying the familiar tiredness. I picked up the wooden box and walked down the stairs. When he saw me standing there with the box in my hands, his eyes darkened. He understood immediately. No explanation was needed. "Margaret," he began. I raised my hand, signaling him to stop. "You don't need to say anything else," I said. My voice was steady. "I've seen enough." Richard stood still. His shoulders slumped, as if he finally no longer had the strength to hold himself upright. He looked at the box, then at me. I no longer saw the powerful man from earlier that day, just someone stripped of every disguise. "I want you to leave this house," I said slowly, each word deliberate. "Tonight." Richard opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He took a deep breath, then shook his head. "Margaret, we can talk. I'll explain. No," I interrupted. Not loudly, but firmly. "There's nothing left to explain. You had 15 years to talk. I don't owe you another minute." He looked around the house, as if only now realizing it was about to no longer be his. "This is my home," he said weakly. "No," I replied. "This was our home once. But you chose to live somewhere else a long time ago." Silence stretched between us. Finally, Richard nodded very slightly. He turned and went upstairs to pack. I stood at the bottom of the stairs, listening to drawers open, clothes being pulled out. Each sound felt like a final period. When he came back down with a small suitcase, I opened the door for him. No tears, no pleading. Just a clear ending that couldn't be reversed. The door closed behind Richard. I stood there for a moment, my hand still on the doorknob. Then I turned back inside, closed the door, and locked it. For the first time in my life, I didn't compromise. I didn't convince myself to accept what was unacceptable. I didn't stay in a marriage that had been dead for a long time. I stood in the quiet house, took a deep breath, and knew that whatever lay ahead, I had just done the only thing left for me to do: choose myself. The next morning, I woke up very early, even though I had barely slept. The house was quiet in a way it had never been before. No familiar footsteps in the kitchen, no refrigerator door opening, no soft cough I had heard for decades. I got up, put on my robe, and walked through the house, as if to confirm that I was truly alone now. The first thing I did was call a locksmith to change all the locks, not out of hatred, but because I needed a clear boundary. When the locksmith asked if I was sure, I nodded without hesitation. The old keys were removed, placed into his toolbox, and disappeared from my life in a very ordinary way. I realized that sometimes the biggest changes happen quietly. After that, I called a lawyer a friend had recommended years ago, someone I never thought I would need. The woman on the other end of the line was calm and professional. I didn't go into details. I simply said I needed advice about a divorce after many years of marriage, involving assets and long-term infidelity. She didn't sound surprised. She just scheduled a meeting later that week. When I hung up, I sat still for a moment, realizing I had taken another step away from my old life. But the hardest part was still ahead. I called my 2 children, one by one. I asked them to come over that evening, saying I had something important to talk about in person. My voice sounded normal, even to me. Maybe because if I had let the emotions surface then, I wouldn't have been able to finish the sentence. Both of them sensed something was wrong, but neither pressed for details. The afternoon passed slowly. I tidied the living room and brewed a pot of tea, as if preparing for an ordinary conversation, but nothing about that day was ordinary. When the doorbell rang, my heart tightened. My son came in first, followed by my daughter. Both looked around the house, then at me, their faces full of concern. "What's going on, Mom?" my daughter asked, gripping my hand tightly. I motioned for them to sit down. I sat across from them, my hands resting on my knees. I took a deep breath. I had stood in front of classrooms for decades, spoken about difficult topics with students, but I had never felt that telling the truth could be so heavy. "Your father doesn't live here anymore," I began. Both of them froze. My son frowned. "Did Dad go on a business trip?" I shook my head slowly. "No, your father has been living another life for 15 years. The air in the room thickened. I saw my daughter's eyes widen, as if she didn't understand what I had just said. My son sat up straight, his voice tense. "What are you saying?" I didn't go around it. I told them, without embellishment, without excuses. I spoke about the other woman, about 15 years of lies, about a child born from that relationship. I didn't give unnecessary details. I only said what needed to be said, what they had the right to know. When I finished, the room fell silent. My daughter lowered her head, tears falling onto her sleeve. My son stood up abruptly, pacing the room, his hands clenched. "That's impossible," he said. "Dad wouldn't do that." I stood up and placed my hand on his shoulder. "I used to think so too," I said softly. That moment hurt more than anything Richard had done to me. Watching my children, who had trusted their father completely, now forced to face this truth, felt like my heart was being torn apart. His betrayal of me was one thing, but the collapse I saw in my children's eyes, that was what nearly took my breath away. Does that mean we have a sister?" my daughter asked, her voice shaking. I nodded. "Yes." The answer left them both silent, not out of jealousy, but because too many emotions collided at once. Shock, confusion, pain, and a sense of loss they couldn't yet name. "She's not at fault," I said immediately, before anything else could be said. "No matter how hard this is to accept, that child is completely innocent. She didn't choose the circumstances she was born into." My son stopped pacing and looked at me. There was an anger in his eyes I had never seen before. "Dad did this to you," he said. "He did this to our family." I nodded. "I know, but I won't turn this into a campaign to destroy him. I don't need to tear your father down to prove anything. The truth is heavy enough on its own." I looked at each of them. "Your father was wrong. Very wrong. But I don't want you to carry hatred for the rest of your lives. You have the right to be angry, the right to be disappointed. But I hope you remember that how you face this also says something about who you are." My daughter broke down, leaning into my shoulder. I held her, feeling her body tremble. My son stood there, eyes red, struggling to hold himself together. I knew each of them was reacting in their own way. There was no right or wrong response in that moment. "My family," my daughter choked up. "Are we still a family, Mom?" I stroked her hair, my voice slow but steady. "Our family has been hurt, but we haven't lost our dignity. I haven't lost myself, and neither have you." I looked around the room, the place that once held laughter, dinners, and conversations that seemed ordinary at the time. "A family isn't defined only by a marriage," I said. "It's defined by how the people in it treat one another when everything falls apart." We sat together for a long time that night. There were questions I couldn't answer. There were emotions I could only listen to. I didn't force my children to forgive. I didn't ask them to take sides. I only said that I had made a decision for my own life and I would take responsibility for it. When my children left, the house fell silent again. But this time, I didn't feel as empty as I had the night before. I was exhausted, but it was a meaningful kind of exhaustion. I knew I had just been through one of the hardest conversations of my life, and I hadn't avoided it. I stood in front of the mirror in the bedroom and looked at the woman reflected there. No longer a wife standing behind a successful man. No longer someone who constantly compromised to keep the peace. I saw a woman standing upright, even though her shoulders were still heavy. My family had fallen apart in a way I never imagined, but I wasn't broken. I hadn't lost my self-respect, and in that moment I understood that from this day on, I would no longer live as Richard's wife. I began to stand up, not with anger, but with the clarity of a woman who had finally chosen to step out of someone else's shadow and walk on her own feet. 3 days after the night I told my children the truth, when the house had finally returned to the slow rhythm of someone living alone, my phone vibrated. An unfamiliar number. I stared at the screen for a long time before answering, as if my body already knew who was on the other end. "Margaret?" A woman's voice said, low and hesitant. "This is Lauren." I didn't answer right away. I sat down in the armchair near the window, where the afternoon sunlight usually slanted through the curtains. In that moment, I didn't feel angry. I just felt deeply tired, as if I had walked a long road without stopping to rest. "I know," I said after a few seconds. My voice was calm, not trembling at all. "Richard told me that you know everything now," Lauren continued. "I'm not calling to apologize on his behalf. I thought we should meet, if you think that's possible." I was silent. Part of me wanted to refuse immediately. I didn't owe that woman any explanation. But another part of me, the part that no longer ran away, understood that some meetings aren't for reconciliation, but for closure. All right, I said, once. We agreed to meet at a small cafe far from both my neighborhood and Richard's office area. I arrived 10 minutes early, not to wait, but to choose a seat that made me feel safe. I sat with my back to the wall, facing the door, a new habit I couldn't remember learning. Lauren walked in right on time. I recognized her immediately, even though she was dressed far more simply than the day I saw her at the office. No high heels, no fitted dress, just a neutral coat, dark jeans, her hair neatly tied back. She looked around, then spotted me. Her eyes paused for a brief moment before she walked over to the table. "Thank you for coming," she said, sitting down across from me. I nodded. "Let's be direct," I replied. "I don't have much I want to hear." Lauren took a deep breath. "I understand." Neither of us ordered a drink right away. The air between us was tight, like a rope pulled too far, but there was no loud hostility. Just two women sitting across from each other, forced to truly see one another for the first time. "I knew about you from the beginning," Lauren said. She didn't avoid it. "Richard never said he was single." That didn't surprise me. It only confirmed what I had already guessed. I nodded slightly. "And yet you stayed," I said. "Yes," Lauren answered. "I told myself I wasn't the one breaking your family, that your marriage already had problems." I looked at her, neither smiling nor arguing right away. "You're very good at comforting yourself," I said. Not sarcastically, just honestly. Lauren lowered her head. "Maybe I am. I'm not proud of it." She told her story, not long-winded, no tears. She said she had never been a legal wife, never had the Harrison last name on any documents, never appeared openly at family events. She existed in a vague in-between, not a secret affair, but not a real wife either. "I lived like a wife without a name," she said, "in a rented apartment, at dinners without relatives, on holidays with just the three of us. 3 people, Richard, her, and the child. I used to believe I accepted that for my daughter," Lauren continued, "that I was sacrificing for her. But as time went on, I wasn't so sure anymore." I looked at her, really looked at her for the first time, not through the eyes of a betrayed wife, but through the eyes of someone who had lived long enough to see that lies rarely have only one victim. "Do you know how I lived?" I asked. No anger, no accusation, just a question. Lauren shook her head. "I only knew you were there, like something taken for granted, like a shadow I tried not to look at directly." I exhaled softly. "I lived as a trusting wife," I said, "believing that silence meant peace, believing exhaustion was the price of success, believing that if I didn't ask questions, everything would be fine." We sat in silence for a moment. The server came by to ask for our order. I asked for hot tea. Lauren ordered black coffee. When the server left, I continued. "I didn't come here to forgive," I said, "and I don't think you need that from me." Lauren nodded. "I didn't expect it." "I just need to understand," I said, "so I don't carry hatred with me." Lauren looked at me, her expression softening for the first time. "If there's one thing I want you to know," she said, "it's that I never thought I won." I looked at her slowly. "I know. Because no one wins in a life built on division. Not the legal wife, not the woman on the sidelines, not the child born into silence. The only person who benefited for a very long time was Richard. I don't blame you," I said. "Not because you were right, but because I don't want to keep focusing on the wrong place." Lauren closed her eyes briefly, as if releasing a breath she had been holding. "Thank you for that," she said quietly. I stood up. I think we've said enough. Lauren stood as well. Margaret, she called, as I had already turned away. I stopped, but didn't turn around. Do you love him? I asked, surprising even myself. Lauren was silent for a long time. I don't know, she finally said. I think I loved the role I was given, and when that role disappeared, I'm not sure what I have left. I nodded, though she couldn't see it. I understand, I said. I walked out of the cafe and took a deep breath of the cool air outside. The feeling in my chest wasn't as heavy anymore, not because everything had been resolved, but because I no longer carried a distorted image of the other woman. She wasn't my enemy. She was part of the lie and had been hurt by it in her own way. The misplaced focus had never been on the two women standing on opposite ends of the story. It was on the man who chose silence for 15 years and called it protection. As I drove home, I realized my hands were no longer shaking. There was no tightness in my throat. I didn't forgive, but I didn't carry hatred either. And for me, at this stage of life, that already felt like a form of freedom. After that, time moved at a different pace, slower but clearer. No more days of waiting and uncertainty. No more guessing what time Richard would come home, whether he was tired, whether he was busy. My life no longer revolved around someone else, and at first that left me more confused than relieved. The divorce process moved faster than I expected, perhaps because Richard didn't resist. He signed every document quietly, exhausted. The assets were divided fairly, according to the law and according to what I deserved after 40 years together. The house remained mine. Part of his retirement was reallocated. There were no loud arguments, no painful tug of war. Everything ended in a cold, almost administrative way, and perhaps that was the most fitting end for a marriage that had been dead for a long time. The day I held the divorce decree in my hands, I didn't cry. I didn't feel victorious either. I only felt a door closing behind me, softly but decisively. I stood outside the lawyer's building, watching people pass by, and for the first time in many years, I had no one to call, no one to share that moment with. And strangely, I didn't feel as empty as I had feared. In the days that followed, I began doing very small things, but for myself. I cleared out the room that had once been Richard's office. I took down the plaques, the old documents, the books he had left behind, not in anger, but with clarity. I repainted the walls a lighter color and placed a small wooden desk near the window. I bought a few green plants. The room gradually became something else, no longer marked by a powerful man, but by a woman learning how to live again. I found my old notebooks, yellowed pages where I had once written, scattered thoughts back when I was teaching. I started writing again. Not to tell Richard's story, but to listen to my own voice. I wrote about quiet mornings, about sunlight falling across the wooden floor, about the feeling of making tea for someone, myself, without needing to ask what they preferred. Some afternoons, I sat in the living room for a long time without turning on the television or playing music, just sitting there, listening to the ticking of the clock. At first, the silence made me uncomfortable. I had grown used to always having someone nearby, even if it was just a quiet presence. But slowly, I realized silence wasn't an enemy. It was simply a space that had never been filled with my own voice. I learned how to be alone without feeling lonely. Some evenings I ate a simple meal and washed the dishes right away, not leaving them for the next day. Some mornings I woke up later than usual, brewed coffee and read the newspaper slowly. I didn't have to report my schedule to anyone. I didn't have to adjust my habits to suit someone else. Those small things, which I had never thought about before, now brought me a strange sense of freedom. I called old friends, people I had been telling someday when I have time for years, without ever having time. We met at small restaurants and talked about things unrelated to family or responsibility. Some knew my story, some didn't. I no longer felt the need to explain my life to everyone. I only needed to be present as I was. One friend invited me to join an evening painting class. I almost refused out of habit, then stopped myself. I remembered that I used to enjoy painting a long time ago. So I went. I sat in a room filled with the scent of oil paint, holding a brush that felt unfamiliar, and let the colors spread freely across the paper. No one judged. No one compared. I didn't need to be good. I just needed to try. Solo trips came afterward naturally. At first, it was just a short drive to a coastal town I'd always wanted to visit, but kept postponing because it was inconvenient. I booked a small room, brought a book, and walked along the shore early in the morning. There was no one beside me, no one to talk to, but I didn't feel empty. I felt more observant of the waves, the birds, the strangers who were also walking alone. On those trips, I began to look back on my life through a different lens. I wasn't only a betrayed wife. I had been a dedicated teacher, a mother, a friend, and now I was an independent woman stepping into a new stage of life, even if that stage arrived later than I once imagined. There were still moments when sadness visited unexpectedly, like a cold gust of wind, seeing an elderly couple holding hands on the street, hearing an old song. Memories don't disappear just because you sign divorce papers, but they no longer controlled me. I allowed myself to remember, then allowed myself to move on. I realized I was slowly reclaiming my sense of self, not through dramatic changes, but through small, steady choices. I chose to wear the dress I liked without asking anyone's opinion. I chose to eat what I wanted. I chose to spend time on things that made me feel alive. Those choices, added together day after day, formed a person I thought I had lost. I no longer defined myself through marriage. I no longer introduced myself as someone's wife. When people asked if I was retired, I simply smiled and said I was enjoying a new chapter of life. No further explanation needed. One morning, I woke up and realized I was looking forward to the day, not because I had an appointment, not because I had something to do, but because I was curious how I would feel. That realization made me sit quietly on the bed for a long time, my hand resting on my chest, as if to make sure it was real. I wasn't younger. I hadn't forgotten the pain, but I was being reborn, in the way of a woman who has lived long enough to understand that life isn't just about existing, but about being fully yourself, without a role to play. And for the first time in many years, that's how I felt I was living. I met Samuel Brooks on a very ordinary afternoon, in a way that, if someone had told me about it years earlier, I would have smiled politely and forgotten it. There was no fateful moment, no lightning strike glance, no racing heartbeat like in the stories people like to tell. Just a quiet afternoon and two people who had endured enough loss to no longer rush. That day, I went to the public library near my home to return a few books. It was early fall, the sunlight gentle, the air cool and fresh. I stopped at the magazine rack, flipping through a travel magazine about Europe that I was considering for an upcoming trip. As I put the magazine back, a man's voice spoke behind me, neither too close nor too far. "You like small towns? In the south of France, too?" I turned around. The man standing there was of average height. his gray hair neatly kept, wearing an old but clean jacket, his eyes calm and kind. Not the type trying to impress, no rushed, polite smile, just someone genuinely curious. "I've never been," I replied, "but I like the idea of places that aren't noisy." He nodded as if my answer confirmed something he had already guessed. "I went once, many years ago, when my wife was still alive." He said it naturally, without sadness, without avoidance. I immediately recognized someone who had lived with loss long enough not to hide it. We talked for a few more minutes, about books, about traveling without packed schedules, about living alone after children grow up. When we parted, he introduced himself as Samuel Brooks. I simply nodded and smiled, not thinking that the brief conversation would continue. But a week later, I saw him again at the same library. This time, we sat at a table near the window, each reading a different book, occasionally exchanging a few scattered remarks. No one asked for a phone number. No one suggested meeting again. Just the presence of two people who didn't feel uncomfortable sharing silence together. Everything unfolded so slowly, it was almost unnoticeable. A coffee afterward, then another walk in the park. Samuel always walked half a step slower than I did, as if unconsciously adjusting his pace to match mine. He never asked intrusive questions. He wasn't overly curious about my past. When I spoke, he listened. When I was silent, he didn't try to fill the space. No promises were made. No lines like, "We will be this," or "our future." And strangely, that was exactly what made me feel safe. I had lived with too many empty promises, words used to postpone the truth. With Samuel, there were no expectations placed on my shoulders. We met only when we both wanted to. Some weeks we didn't see each other at all. Some days we exchanged just a short message. "The weather is nice today." No one complained. No one checked up on the other. No one demanded anything. What made me realize the biggest difference wasn't in gestures, but in how I was listened to. When I spoke, Samuel didn't interrupt. He didn't rush to give advice. He didn't compare my story to anyone else's. He listened as if what I said truly mattered, not as something to endure until it was his turn to speak. Once, when I was talking about the years I had lived in silence in my former marriage, I stopped halfway, afraid I was saying too much. Samuel looked at me and said very softly, "You don't have to summarize your life for me. I have time." That sentence made me turn my face away for a moment, not because I was overwhelmed with emotion, but because I realized how long it had been since anyone had told me they had time for me, not out of obligation, but by choice. I told my children about Samuel after a few months, not to ask permission, but because I didn't want to hide anything. My daughter listened carefully, then smiled. "You look different, Mom," she said, "not because there's someone new, but because you feel lighter." My son asked a few more practical questions, as was his nature. What Samuel did, where he lived, whether he was serious. I answered honestly. I didn't know, and I didn't need to know right now. What reassured me was that neither of them objected. They could see that I wasn't losing myself in this relationship. I still lived in my own house. I still had my own routine. I still traveled alone. Samuel was part of my life, not the center of it. Once he asked if I'd like to go with him to a small concert in a nearby town. I agreed. We sat next to each other in the small hall, soft lights, music flowing slowly. Samuel didn't hold my hand. He simply rested his hand on the armrest, close enough for me to know he was there. I didn't feel like I was starting over. I felt like I was continuing, but as a different version of myself, a version that didn't need to sacrifice herself to keep the peace, didn't need to stay silent to avoid conflict, didn't need to play the role of the understanding woman by accepting everything. Samuel didn't make promises. He didn't talk about a distant future, but he was always there at the right moments. When I caught a cold, he brought over a bag of hot soup and left it at the door, not coming inside unless I invited him. When I traveled, he wished me a good trip and didn't ask who I was going with. When I came back, he listened to my stories without impatience. Happiness came to me very gently. It didn't overwhelm me. It didn't make me lose my guard. It was simply a sense of peace, knowing I could share space and time with someone without having to make myself smaller. One morning, I brewed coffee and stood by the window watching the sunlight rise. I realized I was smiling for no particular reason. I didn't need to name happiness. I just needed to live in it, slowly, clearly, and fully, in the way of a woman who had learned that love isn't a trade-off, but coexistence. I received a call from my son early one morning, when the house was still wrapped in a thin layer of quiet. His voice on the other end sounded deeper than usual, with a hint of hesitation before he got straight to the point. "Mom, Dad's been hospitalized." I was silent for a few seconds, not because I was shocked, but because I needed to identify my own feelings. The news didn't panic me. It passed through like a cold breeze, enough to remind me that some threads, even when cut, still leave marks. "What happened to him?" I asked, my voice even. "His heart," my son replied. "Not critical, but not minor either. The doctors want to monitor him." I looked out the window where the early sunlight was filtering through the curtains. Samuel had left early, leaving a short note on the kitchen table. "I have a routine checkup today. I'll stop by tonight if you want." I folded the note and slipped it into my pocket. I knew I would have to make a decision, not out of duty, but out of clarity. "I'll come by tonight," I said to my son, "not to stay, just to visit." Hospitals always have a particular smell, the scent of disinfectant, of waiting, of time stretched thin. I walked into the lobby and followed the signs to the cardiology ward. Every step was steady. I wasn't going as a wife. I was going as someone who had once shared a long chapter of life with the person lying in that room. When I arrived, both of my children were already there. My daughter stood up first and hugged me lightly. My son nodded, his fatigue clearly visible. I spoke with the doctor, listened to the necessary information. Stable condition, needs rest, needs time. Familiar, neutral words carrying no emotion. Then the hospital room door opened. Lauren was standing there. She looked different from the last time I saw her. Thinner, dark circles under her eyes, her hair hastily tied back. Beside her stood a teenage girl, reserved, her hands clasped together. I recognized her immediately. No introduction needed. The child had Richard's eyes. The space between us froze. Two families, two lives that had once run parallel, now collided in a narrow hallway. There were no polite greetings, no challenging looks, just the heavy awkwardness of people placed in a situation no one had wished for. My daughter stepped forward naturally. "I'm Anna," she said to the girl. "If you want, we can sit together." The girl looked up at Lauren, then at Anna, and nodded very slightly. That moment tightened my chest, not with pain, but because I saw something adults often forget. Children don't carry adults' histories. They only carry their own confusion. I looked at Lauren. She looked back at me, her eyes no longer guarded, only tired. We didn't speak. There was no need. When it was my turn to go into the room, I went in alone. Richard lay on the bed, looking smaller than I remembered. Not because illness had weakened him too much, but because in that stark white space, there were no titles, no roles, just a person. He opened his eyes when he heard the door. His gaze settled on me, startled at first, then softened. There was no panic, no expectation. "You came," he said, his voice hoarse. "Yes," I replied. I pulled a chair closer and sat down, keeping a respectful distance. "How are you?" "Better than this morning," he said. "The doctor says I need rest." We sat in silence for a moment, the steady hum of machines, footsteps in the hallway. I didn't know what I had come to say, but I knew I hadn't come to accuse him. I thought, "You wouldn't come," Richard said quietly. "I came," I replied without emphasizing the subject, "but not in the way you think." He looked up at the ceiling and took a deep breath. "I've thought a lot," he said, "in the past few hours. Times like this usually make people think," I said. "I regret it," he said, turning to look at me. "Not just because everything fell apart, but because I thought I could control everything. I was wrong." I looked at him without avoiding his gaze. "I know." "I don't expect you to come back," he said quickly, as if afraid I might misunderstand. "I know, that's over." I exhaled, relieved by those words. "Yes," I said, "it's over." There were no pleas to return, no late promises, just the bare acknowledgement of someone who had reached the end of a life built on lies and realized it led nowhere. "Are you happy?" Richard asked very softly. The question came unexpectedly, but it didn't upset me. I thought of gentle sunlight in the morning, of coffee by the window, of Samuel in the way he never rushed to take up my space. "I'm at peace," I said, "and that's enough." Richard closed his eyes. I didn't know what he was thinking, and I didn't need to know. I stood up. "I'll let you rest," I said. "The kids are outside." He nodded. "Thank you for coming." I didn't reply. I just smiled very faintly and turned away. When the door closed behind me, I knew that was the last time I would step into the role of his past. There was nothing left to say. Out in the hallway, Lauren stood up when she saw me. She didn't come closer. She just looked at me, as if waiting for a signal. I nodded slightly. Not reconciliation, but acceptance that we had passed through the same pain in different ways. "Thank you," Lauren said. Just one word. I nodded again. "Take care of the girl," I said. "She needs stability." Lauren nodded, her eyes reddening. I turned to the girl. "You have beautiful eyes," I said. She looked surprised, then smiled shyly. That was enough. When I left the hospital, I paused outside for a moment and took a deep breath of the evening air. I called Samuel. "I'm done," I said. "I'm okay." "I'm on my way," he replied. "No rush. Take your time." I ended the call and walked slowly toward the parking lot. No resentment. No clinging. The past had knocked one last time, and I had opened the door, not to go back, but to see it out. As I drove home, the street lights came on one by one, illuminating the road ahead. I realized I was no longer carrying unanswered questions. I didn't need validation from my former life. I didn't need a dramatic ending. I only needed acceptance, and I had it. For the first time in many years, I felt truly free. The following spring arrived more gently than I expected. There was no grand moment marking it, no bells announcing a new beginning, just mornings with earlier sunlight, new buds appearing on the trees in the yard, and a sense of peace as I opened the windows and let the breeze flow through a house that now bore my own imprint. Samuel and I didn't talk much about big plans. We sat together at the kitchen table, spread out an old map, and marked a few places we wanted to visit when the weather warmed. A small coastal town he had once mentioned. A historic city I had always been curious about. No packed schedules, no long-term promises, just plans enough to make us smile when we thought about them. I liked the way Samuel asked for my opinion, listened, then nodded slowly, as if every choice deserved consideration. I no longer had to squeeze myself into someone else's plans. I was a companion, not someone walking behind. On weekends, my children and grandchildren came over more often. We cooked together, laughter filling the newly painted kitchen. I hung my paintings, placed green plants on the windowsills, replaced the sofa with a color I loved. The house was no longer a place that stored old compromises. It became a space shaped by choices I made with my own hands. Every corner told a new story, not loud, not showy, but warm enough to make people want to stay. Some afternoons, when everyone had gone home, I sat alone on the porch, listening to the wind move through the leaves. I realized I was no longer afraid of being alone. Silence was no longer a frightening void, but a place where I could rest. I knew how to brew a cup of tea just the way I liked it, when to go out and see others, and when to stay in. I didn't need anyone to fill my time. I just needed time lived at the right rhythm. Sometimes I looked back on the journey. From the moment I stood frozen in the company lobby, hearing someone else called by my title, to the night I changed the locks and told my children the truth, to the honest meeting with the other woman, to the day I signed the divorce papers and the first morning I woke up to a life no longer defined by marriage. I didn't romanticize the pain. I simply placed it where it belonged in memory, as pieces that had completed their purpose and no longer needed to be carried in my pocket every day. The greatest lesson I learned wasn't don't trust anyone, but don't lose yourself. Self-respect isn't loud. It shows up in small decisions, knowing when to say no, refusing to compromise with what hurts you, having the courage to stand upright before the truth. Identity isn't a label attached to a role. It's the inner feeling of living in alignment with your values, whether you're beside someone or alone. I am enough, even on my own, but I am also open enough to welcome the kind presence of another. Samuel walks beside me, not leading, not pulling me along. He walks with me, and that is enough. When we talk about the future, they aren't promises that make me lose the present, but plans that allow the present to be cherished more deeply. One morning, I hung a newly taken family photo on the wall. My children, my grandchildren, smiles that needed no explanation. I stepped back and looked at the house as a whole. The light fell in the right places. Nothing was perfect, but everything was real. I realized my new life hadn't begun on the day of the divorce, nor when I met Samuel. It began the moment I chose myself, and it continues every day I hold that choice steady. A new life doesn't announce itself loudly. It opens quietly when we stop being afraid. I don't know what challenges lie ahead, but I know I will face them with steadier feet, a wider heart, and a simple belief that I deserve my own peace. If you've walked with me all the way to these final lines, I want you to know that your presence is not small. Somewhere out there, you may be listening to this story on a quiet evening or in the middle of a long, thoughtful day, and that's enough for us to meet in the same emotional rhythm. Where are you listening from? What city or country? Please tell me so I can feel how far this journey has reached you. If, in the pages of life I've just shared, there was a moment that made you pause, nod, or see yourself reflected there, please leave a comment, even just one sentence. I read every word with gratitude. And if you feel this story has given you a little warmth, a little courage to choose yourself, please like the video and subscribe to the channel so we can meet again in future stories. Life doesn't end when we lose something. It truly begins when we dare to live in alignment with our values. Thank you for listening and for being here.